Good evening and welcome back to our journey through mythology. Tonight, we're plunging into the captivating depths of Greek mythology. As always, I'm eager to hear where you're tuning in from around the globe. So get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin our tale. In the beginning, there was no Mount Olympus, no earth as we know it, no encompassing sea, and no expansive sky. There was only chaos. But this chaos was unlike the disorder or confusion we speak of today. It predated language itself. It was a formless, yawning void, a gaping nothingness devoid of direction. It wasn't inherently evil, good, or even neutral, it simply existed. From this primordial nothingness arose the first flickers of being. Gaia, the vast and unshakable earth. Tartarus, the abyssal darkness beneath the earth, a place of dread. And Eros, the force of love and desire, the binding essence that would drive all future creation. These weren't gods in the familiar sense, not yet, but rather elemental truths taking shape. Then emerged Nyx, the night, cloaked in shadows so dense that even chaos seemed to recoil. She was followed by Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, who would dwell alongside her in that primeval silence. From the union of night and darkness sprang ether, the pure, upper air breathed by the gods, and Hera, the day, destined from the beginning to endlessly pursue her mother across the heavens. Thus, the cycle of night and day was born, not through scientific principles, but through myth, a lineage of strange, unseen entities that illuminated and dimmed the sky with each passing hour. Gaia, the earth herself, did not remain passive. Patient and fertile, she brought forth from her own being Uranus, the sky, vast and strewn with stars. He became both her son and her consort, and as he arched over her, stretching across the heavens, the world took its first definitive shape. A domed sky above a broad, limitless plain. Armed with these divine gifts, Perseus flew over sea and desert until he reached the ends of the earth. He found them sleeping, Medusa and her sisters, curled in a shadowed grove, ringed by the statues of those who had come before. Perseus dared not look directly, and so, with Athena's shield held before him, he walked backward, step by cautious step, until he stood over the sleeping Gorgon. With one swift stroke, he severed her head, and from her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the warrior with a golden blade, children of Poseidon, born in death. As Medusa's sisters screamed and clawed the air, Perseus vanished into mist, hidden by the helm of darkness. The deed was done. He returned by the long road, his prize heavy in the sack, its power undiminished. On the way, he passed the shores of Ethiopia, where the sea god had sent a monster to punish King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia for their vanity. Their daughter, Andromeda, had been chained to a rock as a sacrifice. Perseus, beholding her beauty and innocence, slew the beast, turned it to stone with the Gorgon's head, and claimed her as his bride. She would follow him westward, becoming the mother of his line. When at last he returned to Seriphos, Polydectes scoffed at his tale. So Perseus reached into the sack and withdrew the severed head. The king and his court were turned to stone where they stood. Dictys, the fisherman who had shown kindness to a mother and her child, became king in his stead. The cycle of cruelty was broken, if only for a time. But prophecy, once spoken, is not so easily undone. Perseus journeyed to Argos, where King Acrisius, still haunted by the oracle's words, fled rather than face the boy he had once condemned to death. Yet fate does not forget. At the funeral games of a neighboring king, Perseus, throwing a discus, struck an old man in the crowd, Acrisius, his grandfather, who died without ever knowing that his death was not murder, but an accident long foretold. Only two held back. Odysseus feigned madness, sowing salt into his fields until a clever envoy placed his infant son before the plow, revealing his deception. And Achilles, son of Thetis, was hidden by his mother among the daughters of Lycomedes, disguised in silk to escape a destiny she dreaded. But the Greeks, guided by Odysseus's guile, discovered him, presenting him with a spear and shield alongside gifts of jewelry. The boy, drawn to war, chose the weapons. They assembled at Aulis, a fleet of 1,000 ships, their bronze armor gleaming, their sails billowing like thunderclouds. But the winds refused to rise, and the ships remained idle, the men restless. The soothsayers revealed that Artemis had been offended, perhaps by a boast, perhaps by the slaying of a sacred stag, and that only a great sacrifice would appease her. The name spoken was Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon. There are tales of deceit of lies told to lure her to Aulis under the pretense of marriage to Achilles, of her mother Clytemnestra's inconsolable grief, of the moment the blade fell, or of a last-minute intervention by Artemis, who spirited the girl away, replacing her with a deer. But in most accounts, the blood spilled was real, and the gods watched as the king sacrificed his own child for the sake of war. The winds then rose. The fleet sailed east, and the world was forever changed. The Greeks landed on Trojan shores, not as raiders, but as instruments of divine judgment. For 10 long years, they would camp beneath the walls of Ilium, the great city ruled by Priam, defended by his sons Hector, noble and doomed, Paris, beautiful and weak, Deiphobus, Helenus, and the others. The gods themselves took sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon sided with the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis favored the Trojans. Only Zeus attempted to remain neutral, but even he would be swayed, pulled by the forces of fate and family. Gaia also birthed the mountains, tall and untamed, and Pontus, the sea, surging with a will of its own long before any ships or sea monsters disturbed his waters. Together, earth and sky became the first great pairing, and their union gave rise to the Titans, the initial generation of powerful beings who would rule the cosmos long before Zeus and his Olympian kin ascended to power. There were 12 Titans in all, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each vast and elemental in their own right. Oceanus, the river encircling the world. Hyperion, lord of light. Ceus, the inquirer. Crius, the constellation bearer. Iapetus, ancestor of humankind. And Cronus, the youngest and most cunning. Among the daughters were Thea, shining mother of the sun and moon. Rhea, future mother of gods. Themis, embodiment of divine law. Mnemosyne, the memory of all things. Phoebe, the radiant one, and Tethys, the nourishing sea. But Gaia's womb did not cease its labors there. She bore monstrous children as well, beings of immense strength and terror. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steripes, and Argesh, each with a single eye blazing like a forge in the center of their forehead. They were the smiths of lightning, strong and unyielding, and they feared no god or giant. Then came the Centimanes, the 100-handed ones, each colossal and dreadful to behold, with 50 heads and 100 arms, capable of shaking the very foundations of the world when enraged. Uranus, though lord of the sky, trembled at the sight of these monstrous offspring. Ashamed and terrified by their grotesque strength, he forced them back into Gaia's womb, into the depths of the earth, and sealed them there, hidden beneath layers of rock and sorrow. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. The earth, once proud and nurturing, now suffered with every breath. It was in this pain that she began to plot. But that is a story for another day. So the circle closed as they always do in myth. Perseus had fulfilled the prophecy, though not by malice. He had slain a monster, saved a maiden, founded a line of kings, and carried the weight of fate with dignity. He would not live forever, but his name would, for from his blood would come Heracles, and from Heracles the next chapter in the story of gods and men. If Perseus was the first great hero, Heracles was the mightiest. His name, like thunder over distant mountains, carried weight across every land touched by Hellenic breath. He was not merely strong, but larger than life itself, straddling the border between man and god, joy and grief, triumph and tragedy. He was the great-grandson of Perseus, a son of Argos, and a son of Zeus, and though the gods would bless him with strength, they would curse him with suffering. His birth was itself a trick of time. Zeus, ever lustful, desired Alcmene, wife of the Theban general Amphitryon. Disguised as her husband, the king of gods lay with her, extending a single night into threefold length. From that union came Heracles, and from Amphitryon, a twin, Iphicles, mortal and unblessed. Hera, as always, watched from her throne with a cold and bitter eye. She knew her husband's ways, and she knew too well the threat that this child, half-god though he was, might one day pose to her own dominion. Even in the cradle, Heracles bore the mark of the divine. Hera, seeking to destroy him early, sent 2 serpents into the nursery to strangle the infant. But the child, with his chubby hands, instinctively reached out and gripped them both, one trapped in each fist, before a single nurse could even utter a scream. From that moment forward, his legend began to take root. As he matured, he received the finest education a nobleman could desire, mastering music, archery, wrestling, and the art of chariot racing. This was not yet the war chronicled in Homer's Iliad, which would begin in the 10th year, but the war itself had already begun, not merely with spears and walls, but in the breaking of oaths, in the betrayal of trust, in the sacrifice of daughters, and in the judgment of the gods. It was a war born not only of love, but of pride, of divine rivalry and mortal vanity, of ancient curses and deep-seated fears. And it would end not with victory, but with fire. By the time Homer's Iliad unfolds, the war at Troy had dragged on for 9 grueling years. The Greeks, those once fervent kings who had stormed across the Aegean, had succumbed to a grim rhythm of siege and survival. What had begun in fury and flame had transformed into something colder, slower, and more desperate. They erected black-walled camps along the shoreline, hauled their ships high onto the sand, and sent out raiding parties day after day, not just to battle, but to sustain their weary armies. The war lingered, an unhealing wound, its infection seeping into the hearts of both sides. The Trojans, secure behind their formidable walls, raised, as legend had it, by Poseidon himself and Apollo, the mortal architect he served in penance, suffered, but stubbornly held on. The fields outside the city lay barren, but their allies arrived from the east and north, Sarpedon of Lycia, Memnon of Ethiopia, and others, breathing new life into their desperate cause. Yet the Greeks refused to withdraw, unable to abandon Helen, their pride as much as their oaths keeping them tethered to this bloody stalemate. The war had become a matter of legacy, a test of honor. But war resides not merely in walls and ships, but within the hearts of men. And in this war, 2 hearts burned with an intensity that overshadowed all others. Agamemnon, king of kings, stern and imperious, and Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, unmatched in battle, fated to die young, and determined to make that death meaningful. For now, remember this. In the oldest age, before law or justice, before sword or plow, the world was shaped not with hands, but with force, union, and grief. Chaos birthed the first forms, but it was Gaia, the Great Mother, who provided them with a place to stand. The union of Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky, was the cosmos' first great marriage. It wasn't a marriage of altars or witnesses, but of necessity and nature. The sky stretched over the earth, holding her tightly, pressing her beneath his star-studded body night after night. From their joining came the Titans and other mighty offspring, but also a deep and growing sorrow. For Uranus, though proud and vast, was a jealous and fearful father. He saw in the monstrous children Gaia bore not strength, but a threat to his dominion. He looked upon the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants with revulsion, not wonder, and with swift, cruel judgment. He thrust them back into Gaia's womb, deep into the belly of the earth, where no light reached and no voice could echo. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. Not only the agony of bearing them within her again, but the betrayal of her consort, of Sky, who should have cherished their children as she did. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, pressing down the heavens to meet the earth, blind to her pain and deaf to her grief. She could endure no longer, and so, from her own flesh, she fashioned a weapon, not of bronze or iron, for such things had not yet been conceived, but a great sickle of unyielding flint, jagged as truth and sharp as vengeance. Then she went to her Titan sons, the firstborn and mightiest among her children, and laid bare her suffering. "Your father has wronged me," she said. "He has caged your brothers. He has silenced the womb that bore you. Who among you will aid me?" One by one, They turned away, fearful of their father's might. Only Cronus, the youngest, the shrewdest, the one with watchful eyes and a patient heart, stepped forward. Yet, an untamed spirit dwelled within him, a profound restlessness that defied any attempt at suppression by tutors or liars. As he entered manhood, he experienced both love and devastating downfall. He wed Megara, the daughter of Creon, king of Thebes, and for a time life was peaceful. He became a father to sons and a stalwart defender of his city. However, Hera's wrath remained. In a surge of divine fury, she plunged Heracles' mind into the depths of madness. He stormed through his own halls, and with the same hands that once lovingly cradled his children, he murdered his wife and offspring. When the madness finally subsided and clarity returned, he was confronted with the bloody devastation of his own making. His anguished cries echoed all the way to Olympus, but no god offered solace. Seeking atonement, he sought the oracle of Delphi. The Pythia, cloaked in enigmatic pronouncements, declared that he must submit to the will of Eurystheus, the king of Tiryns, his cousin, lesser in strength but favored by fate. Only through servitude, through immense suffering, could Heracles achieve redemption. And so began the legendary 12 labors, feats of such extraordinary magnitude that even the gods themselves took notice. The first labor demanded that he slay the Nemean lion, a beast whose golden hide was impervious to mortal weapons. Heracles cornered the lion in its lair and strangled it with nothing but his bare hands. Then, using the lion's own claws, he skinned the beast and fashioned the hide into a suit of armor, a second skin to shield him from the world. The second labor involved the Lernaean Hydra, a serpentine monster with 9 heads, each severed neck spawning 2 more in its place. Heracles battled the Hydra in the swamps, aided by his nephew, Iolaus, who cauterized the stumps as they were cut to prevent further regeneration. The conflict between these two would shatter the fragile Greek alliance. It began, as so many conflicts do, over a woman. During one of their many raids, the Greeks had taken captives, among them Chrysis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, a princess of Lyrnessus. Chrysis was awarded to Agamemnon, Briseis to Achilles. When Chrysis's father arrived to ransom her, bearing golden gifts and speaking with reverence, Agamemnon scorned him. The old man prayed to Apollo, and the god answered not with celestial fire, but with plague, a silent killer that spread from beast to man, filling the air with death. The prophet Calchas finally revealed the truth. Agamemnon, to save his army, must return Chrysis to her father. Forced to comply, Agamemnon did so, but in turn demanded Briseis from Achilles as compensation. It was a slight Achilles could not bear. He stormed from the council in fury, branding Agamemnon a greedy coward, and swore an oath before the gods. He would no longer fight for the Greeks. Let them bleed without him. With these words, he withdrew to his tent, and with him went the Myrmidons, his elite warriors, silent, dangerous, and forged for war. From that moment, the tide of battle turned. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to falter, and the Trojans pressed their advantage. Hector, son of Priam and champion of Troy, led the charge with a quiet, noble fury. Unlike Paris, who had ignited the war, or Deiphobus, who craved glory, Hector was the heart of the city, a husband, a father, a prince who bore the burden of his people not with pride, but with unwavering duty. Day by day, the Trojans pushed the Greeks back towards the sea. Ships were set ablaze, heroes fell. Protesilaus, the first Greek to leap ashore, had perished in the initial skirmish. Now, Patroclus, friend and companion of Achilles, watched the losses mount with growing despair. "I will do it," he said. "Give me the blade." So Gaia set the trap. She waited for Uranus to descend as he always did, laying himself across her in the dark. And from the shadows Cronus sprang. With a steady hand and no hesitation, he brought the sickle down upon his father. The sky shook with Uranus's cry as the blade bit deep, severing the source of his power. Cronus cast the bloodied flesh into the sea, and from the crimson foam that rose upon the waves, something new was born. A figure of impossible beauty, terrible and irresistible in equal measure. From that white froth came Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, who would later cause kings to fall and empires to burn. She stepped ashore at Cyprus, radiant and serene, untouched by the violence of her origin. But Gaia's vengeance did not end with blood. From the droplets that fell upon the earth sprang other beings, the Furies, cloaked in shadow and vengeance, who would haunt oathbreakers and kinslayers until the end of days, the giants, who in time would rise up against the gods themselves, and the Melee nymphs of the ash trees, guardians of the wild and the old ways. Uranus, wounded and dethroned, vanished into the heavens, leaving the world to his children. Before he fled, it is said he spoke a final curse, one that would ring through time like a bell. Just as I was overthrown by my son, so too shall he be overthrown by his own. It was not a prophecy he invented, but a truth Gaia had already whispered, and Cronus heard it well. He took the sky throne and wrapped himself in power. But from the moment he grasped it, he began to fear what his father had warned. Thus ended the reign of Uranus, the first king of the cosmos, and began the age of the Titans. Yet already, in the womb of time, the next storm was stirring. With Uranus cast down and the sky no longer pressed so tightly upon the earth, the world breathed anew. The Titans, freed from their father's yoke, now stood tall beneath the heavens. From the Hydra's last head, immortal and dripping with venom, Heracles extracted its ichor and dipped his arrows in it, making them deadly enough to wound even gods. The third labor required the capture of the Ceryneian hind, a deer with golden horns sacred to Artemis. Heracles pursued it tirelessly for a year, across mountains and rivers, before finally capturing it gently and alive, earning the reluctant admiration of the goddess. The fourth labor led him to the Erymanthian boar, a monstrous beast of the wilderness. He wrestled it in the snow-covered highlands of Arcadia and dragged it back to Tiryns, bound in chains, reveling in the sight of Eurystheus cowering in terror inside a bronze jar. The fifth task was far less glorious, the cleaning of the Augean stables, home to thousands of cattle whose manure had accumulated for decades, untouched by any cleaning. Heracles, ever resourceful, rerouted rivers to wash away the filth in a single day. The sixth labor tasked him with driving away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with beaks of bronze and razor-sharp feathers. With the aid of Athena's rattle, he startled them into flight and shot them down from the sky. The seventh labor took him far to the west to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent beast of divine origin, believed to be the father of the Minotaur. Heracles wrestled it into submission and brought it back alive, the bull's eyes burning with madness and the salt-fueled fury of the sea. The eighth labor sent him north to Thrace, where he tamed the mares of Diomedes, flesh-eating horses that gnashed their teeth, craving human meat. He fed Diomedes, their master, to them, and the beasts became docile. The ninth labor required both diplomacy and bloodshed. Heracles was sent to retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Although the queen initially agreed to give it to him peacefully, Hera stirred up discord among the warrior women, and a battle erupted. Some say Patroclus was a friend, others a lover, but all agreed he was the only one who could reach Achilles in his grief and rage. When the Trojans breached the Greek defenses and threatened to set fire to the ships, Patroclus pleaded with Achilles to allow him to fight in his stead. He donned the hero's armor, rode his chariot, led the Myrmidons into battle, and for a time the Greeks rallied. But Patroclus, intoxicated by borrowed glory, overextended himself, reaching the very gates of Troy, where he encountered Hector. Their duel was brutal, ending with Patroclus falling beneath Hector's spear, and with him fell whatever peace remained in Achilles' heart. When Achilles learned of Patroclus's death, his grief shook the camp to its foundations. He did not weep like a mortal man. He howled like a storm god consumed by rage and ruin. He returned to battle, not for glory, not for oaths, but for vengeance. His mother, Thetis, brought him new armor, forged by Hephaestus himself, bronze that gleamed like the sun, a shield emblazoned with the history of the world. Then Achilles went to war. No one could withstand his fury. He slaughtered men by the dozens, chariots overturned, blood staining the dust. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times before they met in single combat. Hector fought valiantly, but Achilles was a fire that no water could extinguish. He struck Hector down, pierced him through, and in his rage, dragged his body behind his chariot, circling the city day after day, denying the dead prince the dignity of burial. It was Priam, the aged king of Troy, who brought an end to that madness. Under cover of night, guided by Hermes, he crept into the Greek camp and knelt before Achilles, kissing the hands that had slain his son. He spoke not as a king, but as a father, and Achilles finally wept. He returned Hector's body and granted Priam safe passage. For a fleeting moment, there was quiet in the war, but peace, as always, proved elusive, and Cronus, the youngest and most cunning among them, claimed dominion over all. He was not a god of chaos or cruelty, as his father had been in the end, but he ruled with a cautious and suspicious heart. The sickle he had used to bring down Uranus remained hidden, buried in the earth or cast into the sea. Its blade remembered but unseen, like a secret sin. Cronus had delivered his mother from torment and his siblings from imprisonment. Yet from the very moment he sat upon the throne of the cosmos, his mind was troubled by the prophecy that had driven him to rebellion. The words of his dying father echoed through him like a second heartbeat, that he too would be cast down by his own child. So Cronus took a wife as kings must. He chose Rhea, his sister, a Titaness of gentle strength and deep wisdom, though her name would one day be spoken in the same breath as pain and grief. They ruled through a time that later poets would remember as a golden age, a time when mortals newly created lived in peace, free from suffering, untouched by winter or war, and the fruits of the earth ripened without need for toil. It was an age before kings had armies, before men built walls or worshipped temples, when justice moved unseen among humankind and no one locked their doors. But such peace, as the world has always known, does not last. In time, Rhea began to bear children, and as each was born, Cronus remembered his father's curse. He did not hesitate. The moment Rhea placed each newborn in his arms, first Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, he opened wide his jaws and swallowed them whole. Not a trace was left, not a cry, not a cradle, only the knowledge that they were gone, hidden within their father's belly like seeds in winter soil. He told Rhea it was necessary, that he would not suffer the same fate as Uranus, that the throne must be protected. Rhea, though proud and strong, was powerless against him. She wept, but her tears changed nothing. Heracles slew Hippolyta and escaped with the belt. The 10th labor led him to the edge of the known world, to Erythea, where he stole the cattle of Geryon, a triple-bodied giant. He erected the pillars of Heracles at the Strait of Gibraltar and battled the giant, his herdsman, and his fearsome hound all at once, before driving the red cattle back across continents. However, Eurystheus, determined to discredit him, declared 2 of the labors invalid, claiming that Iolaus had aided him with the Hydra and the rivers had helped with the stables. Thus, 2 more labors were demanded. The 11th was to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by nymphs and a dragon coiled around the tree's base. Heracles tricked Atlas, the Titan who bore the sky on his shoulders, into retrieving the apples while he temporarily took on the burden of the heavens. When Atlas attempted to abandon him to his fate, Heracles cleverly asked for a moment to adjust his cloak and then reclaimed the sky, fleeing with the fruit. The 12th and final labor was the most harrowing of all, to descend into the realm of Hades and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound guarding the gates of the underworld. Armed with nothing but his extraordinary strength, Heracles journeyed to the underworld, presented himself before Hades, and with the gods' grudging permission, wrestled Cerberus into submission, dragging the snarling, frothing beast into the land of the living. With this final labor, his redemption was achieved. Yet Heracles' life was far from peaceful. He fought more battles, took new wives, and fathered numerous children. But Hera's hatred never waned. In the end, it was not a blade or a monster that ended him, but the poisoned blood of the centaur Nessus, smeared upon a tunic by his wife, Deianira, who believed it to be a love charm. As the poison coursed through his flesh, Heracles built his own funeral pyre upon Mount Ida. Achilles would not survive the war. A poisoned arrow, some say fired by Paris, others guided by Apollo, struck his heel, his only vulnerable spot. He died in the dust, young and unmatched, and the war dragged on without him. The Iliad ends not with the fall of Troy, but with a funeral and a shared grief. Yet the war still loomed. The gods were not finished, nor were the Greeks. The wooden horse had not yet been carved. The gates had not yet been opened, but the blood had been spilled, and the tide would soon turn. The war had bled the land dry. 10 years of siege had transformed warriors into hollow shells, kings into ghosts, and heroes into fading memories. Troy, once golden, stood behind its walls like an aging lion surrounded by wolves. The sons of Priam had fallen one by one. Hector, the shield of the city, laid low by Achilles. Troilus, struck down while still a boy. Polydorus, slaughtered in an act of betrayal. The Trojans fought with the desperation of men defending not just stone, but their very history. And yet they persevered year after year, while the Greeks grew weary and restless beside their smoldering campfires. Then, just as the gods began to avert their gaze, the Greeks vanished. At dawn, the Trojans climbed their towers and saw no sails upon the sea. The ships were gone. In their place, on the plain outside the Scaean gate, stood a colossal wooden horse, tall as a temple, its flanks pieced together from smooth planked cedar, its mane carved in honor of Poseidon. No soldiers stirred, no weapons clashed. The war, it seemed, had ended in silence. Troy did not rejoice blindly. Priam, old and cautious, questioned what he saw. Others urged restraint. But it was Sinon, a cunning Greek left behind, who shattered the city's fate. Feigning desertion, he spun a tale so elaborate it might have originated from Odysseus's own lips. The horse, he claimed, was an offering to Athena, a peace token left behind by the departing Greeks. 5 times she gave birth, and 5 times she lost her children to the hunger of her husband's fear. But the 6th time she resolved to act. When she felt the child stir in her womb, she did not go to Cronus. She fled instead to the island of Crete, where the mountains met the sky and deep caves opened beneath the earth. There, hidden among shepherds and nymphs, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. And from the moment of his birth, Rhea knew he was different. His cry shook the trees. His eyes opened before his first breath. And when he grasped her finger, he held it with the strength of fate itself. To deceive Cronus, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and presented it to him with trembling hands. He swallowed it greedily, thinking the danger had passed. But beneath Mount Ida, the infant Zeus was nursed in secret. He was guarded by the Curetes, warriors who danced and clashed their shields to drown out the sound of his cries, and fed by the goat Amalthea, whose milk gave him strength beyond measure. And as Zeus grew, so did the storm that would one day break the world. Yet for now the age of Cronus held. The sky was high, the earth was green, and the Titans ruled from their thrones, oblivious to the gathering wind. But deep within Cronus, 5 children stirred in the dark. And far to the west, a child born in secrecy watched the stars and waited. In the hidden folds of Mount Ida, where the air was thin and the wind whispered ancient names through stone and pine, Zeus grew to manhood. Raised in secret, far from his father's gaze, he learned of the world not through books or scrolls, but from the silence of the high peaks, the rustling of leaves, and the cautious stories murmured by his guardians in firelight. He drank the milk of the divine goat Amalthea, who had nourished him from birth, and from her broken horn, torn by accident or omen, was born the cornucopia, symbol of endless bounty. No mortal dared to light it until Philoctetes, a simple shepherd, stepped forward. For this act of courage, he was gifted with Heracles' legendary bow. Heracles was consumed by the flames, but in death he was reborn. Zeus lifted him to Olympus, granting him immortality and wedding him to Hebe, the goddess of youth. He became not just a hero, but a god. His labors, born of grief and guilt, became the very definition of heroism. While others were remembered in stories, Heracles was honored with shrines, celebrated with games, and forever etched in the hearts of mortals who dared to dream of achieving greatness. If Heracles was the epitome of Greek heroism, then Theseus was the ultimate political figure, the most cunning and the most human. He was not simply a slayer of monsters or a breaker of curses. He was a builder of cities, a creator of laws, and the founding spirit of Athens, the city that would one day proclaim itself the cradle of civilization. His story is interwoven with myth and history, echoing with the clash of heroes and the whispers of politics. Within him resided both brute strength and keen intellect, the dual essence of a nation that revered Athena with a spear in hand and an olive branch upon her brow. Theseus was born of two fathers, King Aegeus of Athens and Poseidon, god of the sea. His mother, Hera, lay with both on the same night, one mortal and one divine. From this dual union came a boy destined for greatness, raised far from Athens in the city of Treason, unaware of the royal blood flowing through his veins. Before departing, Aegeus had hidden a sword and sandals beneath a heavy stone, instructing Hera that when the boy possessed the strength to lift the stone, he would be ready to claim his birthright. As time passed, Theseus grew tall and sharp-eyed, his limbs and mind restless. At the age of 16, he moved the stone with a grunt and a grin, claiming his father's tokens. If the Trojans brought it into their city, it would guarantee their dominance for generations. But if they dared to destroy it, ruin would inevitably follow. Only Laocoon, priest of Poseidon, spoke the truth. "Beware Greeks bearing gifts," he warned, and hurled a spear into the horse's flank. The wood groaned, something shifted within. But in that moment, as if the gods themselves had grown weary of warning mortals, a pair of sea serpents, great and coiled, with eyes like burning coals, rose from the surf and crushed Laocoon and his sons in their constricting coils. The people, witnessing this, proclaimed it a sign. Troy had refused the gods' gift once before. They would not repeat their error. With ropes and wheels, with cheers and hymns, they brought the horse inside their walls. That night, while the city feasted and the fires dwindled to embers, a trapdoor in the beast's belly creaked open, a sound like distant thunder. Out emerged Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, Diomedes, and others, hand-picked for their cruelty and cunning. At the same hour, the Greek fleet, concealed on the nearby island of Tenedos, returned silently under the cloak of night. Troy slept. What followed was not war. It was slaughter. Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, stormed through the palace like a black wind. He murdered Priam at the altar of Zeus, the aged king's blood staining the sacred stones. Cassandra, daughter of Priam and cursed prophetess, was dragged screaming from the temple of Athena, her warnings once again ignored. Hecuba, queen of Troy, watched her sons die and her city consumed by flames. The Greeks showed no mercy. Astyanax, Hector's infant son, was hurled from the walls to prevent any possible future rebellion. Temples were desecrated, women were taken as slaves, and the city of Troy, once the pride of Asia, was given over to the flames. Helen, whose face had launched 1,000 ships, was found in the palace. When Amalthea died, Zeus hung her hide among the stars in her honor, and her memory became part of the sky he would one day command. But he was not born for stargazing or solitude. The blood in his veins was thick with prophecy, and his bones carried the weight of rebellion. As he came of age, Gaia herself began to stir. She remembered the betrayal of Cronus, the pain of her imprisoned sons, the 100-handed ones, and the Cyclopes buried deep in Tartarus. Her vengeance had not ended with Uranus. It had only been delayed. With words as old as stone, she whispered truth into Zeus's dreams, and in his waking hours, she guided his steps. First, she led him to Métis, the Titaness of wisdom, whose counsel was shrewd and whose loyalty leaned toward the future. With Métis's aid, Zeus fashioned a plan. To strike against Cronus, a king of titans and time, would require more than strength. It would demand cunning. Zeus returned in disguise to the house of his father, and there, with Metis's craft, he offered Cronus a potion laced in wine, bittersweet and thick as honey. The drink stirred the old Titan's gut, and at last, with a shudder and a groan, Cronus vomited forth the children he had swallowed long ago. They came not as infants, but full-grown and gleaming, clad in the strength of gods, reborn into a world already poised for war. First Hestia, of hearth and flame, then Demeter, goddess of the grain, then regal Hera, proud and sharp-eyed, then Hades, lord of the dead, and at last Poseidon, master of the deep. The 6 siblings stood together for the first time as one and looked to the throne that had cast them into darkness. They would not forget. But Cronus was not without allies. The Titans rallied to him, his brothers and sisters gathering atop Mount Othrys, the old seat of power in the south. Oceanus remained apart, too old or too wise for blood feuds. But the others, Ceus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, took up arms. While many would have chosen the easy sea route to Athens, Theseus opted for the land route, a longer and more perilous journey, believing that true kingship was earned, not inherited. Thus began the 6 labors of Theseus, less grand and godlike than Heracles' trials, but more earthy and intimate, each confronting a unique terror that plagued the common man on the road. He defeated Periphetes, the club-bearer, and claimed his weapon as a symbol of his victories. He slew Cines, who tied travelers to bent pine trees and tore them in two. He pushed Sciron from the cliffs into the sea, ending the reign of a man who forced passers-by to wash his feet, only to kick them to their deaths. He overcame Circean the wrestler, outmatching brute force with technique, and Procrustes, who forced travelers to fit his beds by stretching or cutting them, met his own end on the same iron frame. Theseus did more than simply survive. He cleansed the land as he traveled, paving the way for Athens itself to flourish. Upon arriving in Athens, King Aegeus did not recognize him. Medea, now Aegeus' wife and still brewing with ancient sorceries, sensed the threat the young man posed and urged the king to poison him. But Theseus presented the sword and sandals, and at the last moment, Aegeus cast the poisoned cup aside, embracing his son before the entire court. But joy is fleeting in myths. Trouble was brewing in the east. For years, Athens had suffered under a cruel tribute. Defeated in a war against Crete, Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 maidens every 9 years to be devoured by the Minotaur, a monstrous half-man born of lust and vengeance, confined within a twisting labyrinth beneath the palace of Knossos. This creature was the result of King Minos's hubris. When Poseidon sent a magnificent bull from the sea, Minos was meant to sacrifice it in the god's honor, but instead, he kept it for himself. Some say she wept and begged for forgiveness. Others claim she stood proud, untouched by grief. Menelaus, blade in hand, gazed into her eyes and lowered his sword. He took her back to Sparta, and the war finally claimed its final prize. When dawn broke over the plain, nothing remained but smoke and ash. The walls had fallen. The gods turned their gaze away, but the war did not end cleanly. The victors carried their own curses. Ajax the Lesser, who had raped Cassandra in Athena's temple, was drowned at sea. Agamemnon, returning home with Cassandra as a concubine, was murdered in his bath by his wife Clytemnestra. The house of Atreus continued to bleed. Menelaus and Helen returned to Sparta, but their names were forever tainted, and Sparta would never again reach the heights it had known before her departure. Diomedes, Nestor, and others vanished into obscurity or exile. Odysseus, cursed by Poseidon, would not see his home for 10 long years. His tale, a winding odyssey of shipwreck and monsters, would become a legend of its own, shaped by gods and loss. Only Aeneas, son of Anchises and Aphrodite, escaped Troy with his father on his back and his son Ascanius by the hand. Guided by omens and stars, he carried the last embers of Troy westward, towards Italy. From his blood, the Romans would later claim, came Romulus, Remus, and an empire even more mighty than Troy. The fall of Troy was not just the end of a city. It was the end of an age, the heroic age, where men dined with gods, where glory outweighed peace, and where fate was carved into flesh and stone. The wooden horse, the fire, the betrayal, the wailing women. These were the final notes of a song that had begun with an apple and culminated in ruin. The walls that had withstood 10 years of siege fell in a single night, and the ashes of Troy drifted out to sea, carried on winds that cared nothing for who had won. So began the war the poets called Titanomachy, the clash of Titans and Olympians, a war that tore across the heavens and split the earth to its core. For 10 years, the battle raged without end. The sky darkened with storm and smoke. Thunder and fire echoed across the mountains, and the world below, still young and silent, watched in dread as its masters fought for the right to rule. The Titans held Othrys, tall and time-worn, while Zeus and his kin made their stand upon Mount Olympus, a peak still unscarred by war. The battles were terrible and unrelenting. Lightning tore open the skies, and tidal waves swallowed islands whole. Volcanoes bled fire, and winds howled like wolves. At times, the war seemed endless, neither side able to land the final blow. But Gaia, ever watchful, knew that the balance could not tip without what had been long buried. She counseled Zeus once more. If he were to win, he must descend into Tartarus and free his monstrous uncles, the Cyclopes and the Centimanes, whom Cronus had kept locked in chains out of fear. With his siblings beside him, Zeus broke the gates of the underworld and released the imprisoned powers. The Cyclopes, grateful and eager, gifted Zeus his greatest weapon, the thunderbolt, the symbol of sky and storm. To Poseidon, they gave the trident with which he would command the seas, and to Hades, a helm of darkness that would make him unseen. The Centimanes, giants with 100 hands, joined the fight at last, hurling mountains like stones and battering the Titans with the fury of ancient things unbound. With these allies, the tide turned. The Olympians pressed forward with a fury no Titan could match. Cronus, proud and unyielding, fought to the last, but the prophecy, as always, unfolded without mercy. The Titans fell. One by one they were driven down, cast from the high places of the earth. Zeus did not slay them. He imprisoned them as his father had done before. As punishment, the gods cursed his wife, Pasiphae, to fall in love with the beast. From their unnatural union came the Minotaur, Asterius, a creature of horns and violence, a living shame sealed away in the maze designed by Daedalus, the great inventor. Learning of this grim tribute, Theseus volunteered himself among those chosen. He would go not as a lamb to the slaughter, but as a hunter into the beast's lair. Before his departure, he promised his father that if he succeeded, he would return with white sails upon his ship. If he failed, the sails would remain black. Upon arriving in Crete, fate intervened once more. Ariadne, daughter of Minos and half-sister to the Minotaur, saw Theseus and fell in love. She gifted him a ball of thread, a clue to navigating the labyrinth's winding paths. That night, Theseus entered the maze. In its dark coils, where stone endlessly turned into stone, he confronted the beast. They fought without words, a prince against a nightmare. Theseus, armed with skill and a sharpened blade, struck the creature down, then followed the thread back into the light. He fled with Ariadne and the freed Athenians, sailing into the Aegean Sea. Yet, love in Greek stories is never without complications. On the island of Naxos, Theseus abandoned Ariadne. Some say Dionysus claimed her for his own. Others say Theseus feared what a Cretan bride might mean for the Athenian throne. She awoke alone, weeping beneath unfamiliar stars. Theseus continued homeward, but in his sorrow or forgetfulness, he neglected to change the sails. From the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus saw black on the horizon and presumed his son dead. Grief-stricken, he leapt into the sea, which to this day bears his name, the Aegean. Now king, Theseus did not rest. He unified Attica, the region around Athens, merging its villages into a single city-state. He established festivals and games, temples and laws. He was as much a hero of governance as he was of combat. The fall of Troy was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another kind of tragedy, one fought not on open fields or within high-walled cities, but on dark seas in storm-tossed realms, and in the crumbling halls of once proud kings. For those who survived the war, the journey home would prove far more perilous than the war itself. The gods, unappeased by the sack of Troy, unleashed their fury upon the victors. The winds that had once carried them to war now scattered them like leaves across the face of the world. Agamemnon, the High King, returned first, or so it seemed. He sailed with Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess taken as a concubine, and brought with him spoils, stories, and the looming shadow of his crime. The gods had not forgotten the sacrifice of Iphigenia, his daughter, slain to appease Artemis before the war began. And in Mycenae, Clytemnestra, queen, mother, and widow in all but name, had not forgotten either. She had taken a lover in Agamemnon's absence, Aegisthus, a cousin with his own score to settle, descended from the cursed house of Atreus. Together they plotted murder beneath the roof Agamemnon had built. When the king returned, triumphant but weary, he walked into his palace as into a trap. Some say he was stabbed in the bath. Others that Clytemnestra ensnared him in a robe and struck him down with an axe. Cassandra died too, screaming in a language that no one understood, murdered at the threshold of a foreign land. Clytemnestra, bloodied and unrepentant, stood over her husband's corpse and declared her act justice. In that house, vengeance had become tradition. In time, vengeance came again. Orestes, son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returned from exile and slew both his mother and her lover, driven on by Apollo and tormented by the Furies, ancient goddesses who punished kinslaying with madness. His was a tale of blood and absolution, one that would resonate in Athenian courts and myths for generations. Deep into Tartarus they were hurled, bound in chains forged by the hundred-handed ones behind bronze gates that would never rust or break. Only a few escaped that fate. Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had sided with the gods, and Themis, who foresaw the justice of their rule. So ended the reign of the Titans. The sky cleared, and the world, scarred by fire and war, began to heal. The throne passed to Zeus, not by birthright, but by might and wisdom and fate fulfilled. Yet even as he claimed the heavens, the shadow of Cronus's curse lingered behind him like the echo of an old song. For power once seized must always be watched, and no ruler, god or mortal, sits secure forever. When the war was over and the world lay quiet beneath the sky once more, the victors stood amidst the rubble of creation. The Titans were chained in the depths of Tartarus, their groans swallowed by that black abyss from which no echo returned. The old order had been broken, but with the storm of war ended, the gods faced a new challenge, perhaps greater than any battle, to rule. For conquest may be won with fire and fury, but rule demands judgment, patience, and division. The world was wide and wild and filled with powers both known and yet unnamed, could not be held by one alone. Zeus, eldest among the gods now born again, stood at the center of this new age. Though not the firstborn, he was first in might, first in cunning, and first to move when action was demanded. But the old laws, carved not on stone but into the bones of the cosmos itself, did not grant him sole dominion. He had two brothers, both tempered by war and made strong in their own right. Poseidon, who had driven the sea to foam in his wrath, and Hades, who had worn the helm of darkness and moved unseen through battlefield and cavern alike. They too had shed blood, taken risks, and suffered loss. The throne of the cosmos could not belong to Zeus alone, lest the seeds of war be sown anew, this time among brothers. He ventured time and again into myth, fighting alongside Heracles against the Amazons, journeying to the underworld with Pirithous, his reckless friend, to abduct Persephone herself from Hades. That journey ended in failure. Pirithous was swallowed by the earth, and Theseus was trapped upon the chair of forgetfulness, his memory eroded by the air of death. Only Heracles, on his own journey to retrieve Cerberus, tore him free. But time moves ever forward. In the end, the Athenians, weary of kings and drawn to new heroes and philosophies, drove Theseus into exile. He fled to the island of Skyros, where he was betrayed by a jealous king and cast from a cliff. His bones would later be retrieved by the Athenians and buried with honor. But at the time of his death, he was alone. No crowd, no crown, no chorus. And yet, his legacy endured. Where Heracles symbolized the strength of the body, Theseus embodied the strength of the polis, the city, the law, the people bound by something more than blood. Athens would rise on his shoulders, and though it would worship Athena, it would never forget the king who built its very foundations. Long before Troy burned and long after the Titans fell, there arose a voyage unlike any other. A quest that spanned continents and gods, united heroes and brotherhood, and culminated in betrayal and exile. It was a tale of dragons and oaths, of kings usurped and thrones reclaimed. At its center stood Jason, a prince exiled in childhood, a hero forged not by war or prophecy, but by the slow, persistent flame of vengeance. His story began in Iolcus, a coastal kingdom in Thessaly. Jason's father had been overthrown by his own brother, Peleus, a man who recognized no law but power. Fearing the boy who might one day challenge his rule, Peleus sought to kill Jason at birth. But his was not the only path home twisted by divine hands. Menelaus and Helen wandered long across the sea, driven southward to Egypt by contrary winds. Some accounts claim that the Helen who went to Troy was merely a phantom, while the real woman had remained in Egypt all along, untouched and ageless, while a war raged for her shadow. Others say that she willingly accompanied Paris and that Menelaus forgave her, weary of war and yearning for peace. They eventually returned to Sparta and ruled together in uneasy silence. But Helen's name, once a poem, had become a curse, and Sparta would never again rise as high as the day she left. But it was Odysseus whose journey became the most storied, the most sorrowful, the most enduring. After Troy, he sailed not towards home, but into a 10-year ordeal by sea, caught between the wrath of Poseidon and the whims of fate. He was not innocent. Odysseus had masterminded the wooden horse and led the sack of Troy, thereby desecrating temples and angering gods. Poseidon, in particular, had marked him for punishment. Odysseus's ship was tossed from island to island, each more bizarre than the last. He blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops, son of Poseidon, escaping under the clever guise of nobody. He lingered with Circe, the sorceress who transformed his men into swine, and with Calypso, the sea nymph who held him captive as a lover for 7 long years. He journeyed to the edge of the underworld, spoke with the dead, and heard the song of the sirens, tied to the mast while his crew sailed with ears plugged with wax. He sailed between Scylla and Charybdis, lost all his men to storm and folly, and finally washed ashore, alone on the island of the Phaeacians, who, moved by his tale, gave him a ship and safe passage. At last, he returned to Ithaca in rags and silence, his beard long, his eyes cold. And so the three gathered Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and cast lots to divide the realms of the world. Not through bickering or force, but by fate itself did the dice fall. This was no child's game. The casting of lots was sacred, guided by the same power that had spoken through Gaia's whispers and shaped the course of the Titanomachy. They threw the bones and waited. When they landed, the world was drawn into 3 great dominions. To Zeus fell the sky, the broad heavens, the air between stars and peaks. He became lord of thunder and rain, master of storm and cloud, and the undisputed king of Olympus. His voice would echo in thunderclaps, his fury would blaze in lightning, and the eagle became his herald, soaring high above all. To Poseidon fell the sea, deep and restless, full of mystery and monsters. He took the oceans, the rivers, and every spring that bubbled from the earth. With his trident, he could shatter cliffs and stir the tides to rage or calm. Beneath the waves, he built a palace of coral and gold, and there he ruled not only over fish and current, but over creatures older than time. Sea serpents, leviathans, and things whose names had never been spoken aloud. To Hades fell the underworld, the land of the dead. It was not a prize most would have chosen, but Hades took it with quiet resolve. He ruled the shadowed realm with stern dignity, his kingdom hidden beneath the earth where the sun did not shine. There he became master of the shades, the judge of mortal souls, and guardian of wealth hidden in the deeps, gems, metals, and secrets lost to time. Though men feared his name and whispered it only when necessary, Hades kept the balance between life and death, and it was said he never once broke the laws he was sworn to uphold. The earth itself, Gaia's own flesh, was left as a common realm, shared by all. The mountains belonged to no one, the fields were roamed by mortals and spirits alike, and the forests grew wild under no single banner. But Ezin, forewarned, sent the infant away, smuggled from the court and raised in secret by the wise centaur Chiron, who had also trained Achilles, Asclepius, and other sons of destiny. Jason grew strong in the wilderness, nurtured on honey and knowledge, his limbs toughened by hunting, his mind enlightened by tales of kings who had fallen and risen again. Years passed, and Jason returned, a man clad in a single sandal, having lost the other in the muddy currents of the Inoros River while carrying an old woman across. The woman, of course, was Hera in disguise, testing the young hero. When he entered the city, Peleus saw the one-sandaled stranger and turned pale, for the oracle had once warned him, "Beware the man who comes wearing only one shoe." Jason, bold but not foolish, did not draw his sword or raise a cry. He spoke plainly. He was Ezin's son and the rightful heir. Peleus, too cunning to strike openly, feigned welcome and offered a test. "If you wish to be king," he said, "then prove yourself worthy. Retrieve for me the golden fleece from the distant land of Colchis. Bring back that ancient prize, and I will yield the crown." The ram had carried him across the sea, and when Phrixus reached safety in Colchis, he sacrificed the beast in gratitude. Its fleece, as gold as fire, was nailed to an oak in a sacred grove, guarded by serpents and shadows, and watched over by King Aetes, son of the sun god Helios. No Greek had ever journeyed there and returned, but Jason accepted the challenge. He summoned the greatest heroes of his time to join him, and they came not as soldiers, but as volunteers, each seeking glory. Heracles arrived, as did Orpheus with his lyre, Atalanta the huntress, Castor and Pollux, the sons of Zeus, Meleager, Theseus, Zets and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind, 50 heroes in all. Together, they boarded a ship named the Argo, built by Argus under Athena's guidance. There, in his absence, suitors had overrun his house, feasting and plotting to marry his wife Penelope, who had waited patiently, weaving and unraveling the same shroud by candlelight. Odysseus, with the help of his son Telemachus, his loyal swineherd, and the bow that only he could string, slew the suitors one by one. Blood flowed through the great hall. Peace returned, but only for a time. The cycle of war and vengeance was never far behind. Many others fared worse. Ajax the Lesser was struck down by Athena for his sacrilegious acts. Diomedes, though valiant in war, returned to find his wife unfaithful and his city turned against him. He wandered westward, founding cities that faded into legend. Philoctetes, who had slain Paris with Heracles' bow, found no welcome at home and became a wanderer. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, was killed at Delphi, cut down at Apollo's altar, perhaps in penance for the blood he had shed at Troy. The Trojan War had promised glory. It delivered only ashes. The heroes who had once stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the walls of Ilium returned to broken homes, bitter wives, hostile gods, and the hollow echo of songs that no longer reflected the truth. In the end, there were no victors, only survivors. Before the walls of Troy ever stood, before heroes raised shields or ships touched the wine-dark sea, there existed a deeper current of power, older than mankind, older even than war, the dominion of the gods. Their stories are often whispered beneath the tales of mortals, but it was the Olympians who wove the very fabric of fate. And it was not always they who ruled. Before Olympus there was chaos, and from chaos came Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and the slow, violent birth of divine order. The age of the Titans had ended with fire and thunder. Zeus, youngest of Cronus's children, had rebelled against his father, freed his siblings from the belly of the sky god, and cast the Titans into the black pit of Tartarus. It was a realm in between, where gods might walk and mortals might see them, but it was also where ambition brewed and where fate would continue to work its quiet will. Thus the world was ordered, sky, sea, and underworld. The three brothers, now kings in their own realms, swore not to war among themselves, lest the world break anew. They built their thrones and gathered their followers. On Mount Olympus, high above the clouds, Zeus called the gods to council. There, beside him, stood his sisters. Hera, proud and sharp as winter ice, Demeter, whose steps awakened spring, and Hestia, ever burning at the hearth of every home. And others came, new and old. Athena, born from wisdom and war. Apollo, golden and far-seeing. Artemis, silent and swift. Ares, bloody-handed. Hermes, fleet of foot and mind. Hephaestus, limping but brilliant, and Aphrodite, whose smile could unravel kings. It was the beginning of a new age, the age of Olympus. But though the thrones had been set and the realms divided, the world would not stay still for long. The gods, for all their power, were not immune to pride, nor love, nor rage. And the mortals who now began to rise across the lands would bring their own stories, their own wars, and their own share of sorrow. The heavens had been won, but peace is never simple when gods sit upon the throne. When the smoke of war faded and the world was cast once more in sunlight, Mount Olympus became the seat of a new and glittering court. The Titans had ruled from Mount Othrys in the south, harsh, ancient, and wrapped in storm. But Olympus, in the north, stood higher still, its summit crowned in cloud and crowned in myth. The mountain was not merely a place, but a threshold, a place where sky met stone, where the mortal world ended and the divine began. It was here that Zeus, having claimed the heavens by fate and force, gathered the new pantheon of gods. The Olympian court did not mirror mortal kingdoms. In its prow, she set a piece of sacred oak from Dodona, timber that could speak in prophecy. The ship itself was a character in the tale, whispering warnings and guiding fate. They sailed east past shores and tempests into legend. Their first trials were not against monsters, but against men. On Lemnos, they discovered a land ruled by women who had slain all their husbands. There, Jason lay with Hypsipyle, the queen of the isle, and fathered sons he would never see grow. In Thrace, they encountered the blind seer Phineus, tormented by the Harpies, who fouled his food. The winged Boreads drove the creatures away, earning Phineus's prophecy. A path through the deadly clashing rocks, two cliffs that slammed shut like jaws upon any who dared to pass between them. Following Phineus's advice, they released a dove. It flew through, losing only a single tail feather. The Argo followed at full speed, and the rocks caught her stern, but just barely. From that moment on, the passage remained still. The sea, it seemed, respected those who dared. At last, they reached Colchis, a land of fire and iron. King Eets did not kill them on sight. Jason was a stranger, and in that ancient world, strangers were sacred. But Eets agreed to grant the fleece only if Jason completed 3 impossible tasks. Yoke fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, sow it with dragon's teeth, and then defeat the warriors who would rise from the soil. These were not tests of courage, but tests of impossibility. It would have ended there had the gods not intervened. Eros, at Hera's urging, struck Medea, daughter of Eets, with an arrow of love. She was a priestess of Hecate, versed in herbs and poisons, untouched by men, cold as moonlight. But at the sight of Jason, her heart betrayed her. In their place rose the Olympians, 12 in number, though their names and thrones shifted with time. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, and Hermes. Upon Mount Olympus, the gods established a new order, one not necessarily kinder than its predecessor, but undoubtedly more intricate and deeply intertwined with the destinies of mortals. From his resplendent golden throne, Zeus reigned supreme, his thunderbolt ever at hand, his pronouncements carrying immense weight among both gods and humans. Yet, his dominion stemmed not solely from brute strength. He was a sagacious king who valued alliances, rewarding unwavering loyalty and decisively punishing betrayal. He apportioned the world amongst his brothers, the heavens for himself, the vast seas for Poseidon, and the shadowy underworld for Hades, fostering a precarious equilibrium between Earth and Olympus. Around him, the new pantheon crystallized. Hera, both his sister and queen, presided as the goddess of marriage and childbirth, though her days were often consumed by suspicion and wrath, for Zeus was notoriously unfaithful. His countless liaisons with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women alike spawned offspring who would indelibly shape the world. Heracles, Perseus, Helen, Minos, and countless others. Ever vigilant, Hera relentlessly pursued his lovers and their progeny with a cold and enduring fury. Beside them stood Athena, born not from a womb, but miraculously from Zeus's very skull, emerging fully formed and clad in armor. The goddess of wisdom and warfare, she favored mortals who demonstrated cunning over sheer force, championing figures like Odysseus and guiding cities, such as Athens, to flourish under the principles of law and reason. Unlike Ares, who reveled in carnage, Athena's warfare was disciplined and precise, her presence marking the Olympian era as one defined by intellect as much as might. There were no brick-paved roads leading to its gates, no heralds announcing guests, no armies stationed at its base. The gods needed no walls to guard them. The air itself served as their boundary, a veil too high for mortal breath. Olympus was said to have no storms, no snow, no decay. Its halls were of marble and cloud, its ceilings vaulted with starlight, and its corridors stretched wide enough for wind to wander freely. Here the gods walked not as shadows or omens, but in full form, radiant, terrible, and more alive than anything that walked the earth below. At the summit of Olympus stood Zeus, king of gods and men, seated upon a throne of thunder. He ruled not by brute strength alone, though his power was unmatched, but by the will of fate and the long memory of war. His voice carried like distant thunder, his eyes saw beyond clouds and time, and in his hand he carried the thunderbolt, the Cyclope's gift, the symbol of judgment, swift and final. Yet even Zeus did not reign unopposed. Surrounding him stood the other Olympians, each a vital pillar supporting the new world order. Hera sat at his side, not simply as his wife, but as queen, possessing sovereign power in her own right. She was the goddess of marriage, queenship, and childbirth, and the silent, simmering fury of a woman scorned. Proud and implacable, Hera harbored every perceived slight, and her jealousy would one day shape the destinies of both gods and mortals. Her crown was not merely a gift. It was earned, forged in the crucible of betrayal and secured by the sacred oaths sworn on Olympus. Next was Demeter, the goddess of grain and the burgeoning harvest. Where her feet graced the earth, the soil softened, and dormant seeds awakened. Her presence heralded abundance, and without her blessings, the fields would wither and die. She did not dwell solely among the thunder and marble of Olympus, but often wandered the mortal realm, watching over the plowmen and the mothers who whispered her name at dawn. She gave him a potion to shield him from the flame, taught him to hurl a stone among the earthborn warriors so they would turn on one another, and at last led him to the fleece itself, guarded by a serpent that never slept. Medea chanted spells, and the beast sank into slumber. Jason seized the fleece, brilliant and soft as molten gold, and fled with Medea into the dark. Eats pursued them with ships, but the lovers had bought time with blood. Medea had taken her young brother, Absyrtus, cut him into pieces, and scattered them in the sea, forcing her father to stop and gather the limbs for burial. The Argo slipped away, stained by crime and magic. Their return was a wandering, past Scylla and Charybdis, through lands of danger and delay. At length, they returned to Iolcus, but Peleus refused to yield the crown. Medea, in vengeance, tricked his daughters into cutting him to pieces and boiling him alive, claiming it was a spell of rejuvenation. Horrified, the people rose up. Jason, now tainted by treachery, was exiled. He fled to Corinth, where he and Medea lived for years in uneasy peace. But Jason, ever seeking legitimacy, cast Medea aside and chose a Corinthian princess for his bride. Medea, wronged and vengeful, unleashed a fury no man could withstand. She poisoned the bride's gown, burning her to ash, and murdered her own sons by Jason. Then she fled, carried away in a chariot drawn by dragons, a gift from her grandfather, Helios. Jason, broken, returned to Iolcus. In his final days, he wandered among the ruins, forgotten. One day, resting beneath the Argo, now dry-docked and decaying, a beam broke loose and struck his skull. So passed the great hero, not in battle, not in glory, but in silence, beneath the bones of his past. Yet the tale of Jason endured. For in the quest for the fleece, in the gathering of heroes, in love turned sour and greatness undone, Greece found one of its most enduring myths, the promise and the price of ambition. Apollo and Artemis, the twin children of Leto, brought both light and shadow in equal measure. Apollo, with his golden hair and radiant aura, governed prophecy, music, and healing. He held sway over the oracle at Delphi, speaking in enigmas through the Pythia, shaping the fates of kings and the outcomes of battles with his cryptic pronouncements. Yet, he was also capable of unleashing plagues, as he did upon the Achaeans at Troy. Artemis, his sister, roamed the untamed forests, untouched by men, a fierce huntress and protector of all wild creatures. She sought no permission and granted no forgiveness to those who dared trespass in her sacred groves. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, ensured the earth's fertility, except during the times when her beloved daughter, Persephone, was abducted by Hades. Consumed by grief, Demeter allowed the crops to wither and die, and from her sorrow, the seasons were born, her myth echoing through every field, every frigid winter and every rejuvenating spring, a perpetual cycle of mourning and renewal. Aphrodite, according to some accounts, arose from the sea foam where Uranus's severed flesh had fallen, and she governed love and desire. Her unparalleled beauty drove both gods and mortals to the brink of madness, ensnaring hearts in both ruin and delight. Though married to Hephaestus, the lame smith god, she bestowed her affection and body upon Ares, the god of war. Together, they embodied the chaotic forces of passion and conflict. Hermes, the quick-witted son of Zeus, flitted between worlds as messenger, thief, and guide of souls. He was the god of boundaries, both upholding and transgressing them. No door remained closed to Hermes, and he moved freely from Olympus to Hades, from feasts to battlefields, a perpetual smile gracing his lips. This new pantheon did not rule in silence, nor were the Olympians distant and detached creators. Older than many, quieter than most, none dared question her immense power. Then there was Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, and the last to be released from her father's belly. She desired no grand temples, no epic myths, no wars fought in her name, no passionate lovers. Instead, she tended the eternal flame at the heart of Olympus and watched over every home and hearth on earth. Her power was gentle, yet ever-present, for as long as fire burned within a household, Hestia resided there as well. The younger gods emerged in due time, some born on Olympus, others arriving through extraordinary circumstances. Athena was foremost among them, born not of a womb, but of pure wisdom. When Zeus, fearing her unborn child would surpass him, swallowed Metis whole, he believed the matter concluded. But Metis did not perish. She lived within him, whispering, scheming, and crafting knowledge in the shadows. One day Zeus cried out in unbearable agony, and with a mighty blow to his skull, Athena sprang forth, fully grown and clad in bronze armor, spear in hand, her eyes clear and sharp as flint. She became the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and righteous battle, a virgin warrior with no patience for frivolous pursuits. Apollo and Artemis followed, twins born to Leto, a Titaness who wandered long and wearily in search of a place to give birth. No land dared offer her sanctuary, for Hera's wrath was vast and vengeful. Finally, the floating island of Delos accepted her, and there she birthed her children. Apollo, golden-haired and radiant, who became the god of light, prophecy, music, and healing, and Artemis, swift and silver, the goddess of the hunt, wild creatures, and the moonlit night. Together, they represented a new generation of gods, restless, vibrant, and deeply connected to the mortal world. Then came Ares, god of war and carnage, son of Zeus and Hera, yet favored by neither. There are few bloodlines in Greek myth more cursed than the royal house of Thebes. Where most heroes battled monsters or sailed for distant thrones, the Theban kings fought their own kin and waged war against the past itself. Their legacy is not carved in bronze or sung in triumph, but written in riddles, madness, and murder. Even the city's founding was steeped in omens and unrest. Thebes began with a quest. Cadmus, a Phoenician prince and brother to Europa, set out to find his sister after Zeus abducted her in the guise of a white bull. Unable to recover her, Cadmus sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi, who instructed him to abandon his search and instead follow a cow until it lay down. There he was to found a city. Obediently, he wandered until the beast collapsed upon a hill. But when Cadmus sent his companions for water, they met their deaths at the hands of a serpent sacred to Ares, guarding a spring. Cadmus slew the serpent himself, and at Athena's bidding, sowed its teeth into the soil. From the earth sprang armed warriors, the Spartoi or sown men, who turned on one another until only 5 remained. These 5 became the noble families of Thebes, and Cadmus their king. But the slaying of Ares' serpent incurred divine wrath. Cadmus served the war god for 8 years in penance. He married Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, and the gods themselves attended their wedding. The couple received a cursed necklace forged by Hephaestus, a thing of exquisite beauty that would bring ruin to all who wore it. And so, the doom of Thebes began not in hatred, but in celebration, cursed by beauty and blood. Generations passed. Cadmus' daughters would meet cruel fates. Ino went mad and threw her child into the sea. Actaeon, Autono's son, was torn apart by his own hounds after glimpsing Artemis bathing. Semele, beloved by Zeus, was tricked by Hera into demanding that he reveal his true form and died in flames. They were imminent, meddling, playing favorites, and waging subtle wars through the agency of mortals. Unlike the Titans, who personified elemental forces, the Olympians mirrored human nature, albeit magnified to divine proportions. Their loves were messy, their grudges eternal, their pride immense. They aided and hindered as their whims dictated. Cities were founded in their honor, sacrifices were offered to curry their favor, oracles proclaimed their will, and every home maintained a flame for Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, who asked for little and bestowed peace in return. Yet, beneath all their grandeur lay a constant truth. Their power, though vast, was not absolute. They could be bound by oaths, outwitted by mortals, and ultimately undone by time. Even Zeus, in all his glory, was haunted by the same fear that had consumed his father, that one day a child of his own would rise up to overthrow him. It was for this reason that he abandoned his union with Thetis, arranging her marriage to the mortal Peleus so that Achilles, her son, would die young and not ascend to challenge his reign. In this regard, the Olympians were no different from mortals. They feared loss, clung to their thrones, and fought tooth and nail to maintain their established order. But for a time, they reigned supreme, their names etched into every marble temple, their deeds celebrated in every song, their symbols emblazoned on shields and coins. The age of heroes had passed, but the gods still held sway over the world of men. And yet, from distant lands and whispered prophecies, came the faintest echo of change. New gods stirred beyond the horizon. The temples would not remain full forever, but for now Olympus still stood, a testament to their might. The Olympians were powerful, but they were not unchallenged. He embodied strength without discipline, rage without cause, and though his name inspired fear, he was not often revered. War followed him like a shadow, and he reveled in its chaos, yet he was frequently outmaneuvered by cunning and wisdom. His antithesis was Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge, master craftsman, and lord of the flame. Whether born of Hera alone or cast down from Olympus by Zeus, both stories were told. He found solace in metal, forging wonders with hammer and fire. From his hands came armor, palaces, and intricate automatons. Though physically impaired, he was among the most indispensable of the gods. Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and desire, arrived not through birth, but from the sea foam, born of Uranus's severed flesh cast into the waves. She emerged from the surf at Cyprus, as breathtaking as she was dangerous. Love, lust, jealousy, and ruin trailed in her wake. Even Zeus could not fully command her, as she bound gods and mortals alike with a single glance. And though she smiled often, it was never without consequence. Hermes, the trickster and herald, was the last to join this early court, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia. He moved swiftly between worlds, winged sandals upon his feet and a mischievous grin upon his lips. He stole Apollo's cattle on the very day of his birth, sang a song to conceal the theft, and rendered himself indispensable before he could even walk. He became the messenger of the gods, guide of souls, patron of thieves and travelers. Where Hermes went, boundaries dissolved. This was the Olympian court, a gathering not of saints, but of raw, flawed, radiant, and immense powers. They bickered as siblings do, took sides in mortal affairs, fell in love, betrayed each other, engaged in petty rivalries, and meted out divine justice. But above all, they ruled from Olympus. They observed the world below and shaped it to their will. And Agave, in a frenzy of Dionysian madness, tore her own son, Pentheus, limb from limb, believing him to be a lion. But it was through Cadmus' great-great-grandson Laius that the true tragedy would unfold. Laius became king of Thebes and took Jocasta as his queen. Yet the gods had not forgiven the line of Cadmus. An oracle foretold, if Laius ever had a son, that child would kill his father and marry his mother. As in all Greek stories, the warning was not enough to prevent the sin. Laius lay with Jocasta, and a son was born. Terrified, Laius ordered the infant's ankles pierced and bound, then gave him to a servant to be abandoned on Mount Cithaeron. But the servant, pitying the child, passed him to a shepherd, who in turn delivered him to the king and queen of Corinth, Polybus and Merope, who were childless and welcomed the boy as their own. They named him Oedipus, meaning swollen foot, and never told him the truth of his blood. Oedipus grew into a clever and proud young man, but rumors of his birth reached him. Seeking the truth, he journeyed to Delphi, where the oracle delivered the same prophecy once spoken to Laius, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, Oedipus fled Corinth, unwittingly running toward his destiny. On the road, at a crossroads near Daulis, he encountered a stranger, old, proud, and imperious. A quarrel erupted over the rite of passage, and in the heat of rage, Oedipus slew the man and his attendants, never knowing that he had just killed his true father, Laius. He continued on to Thebes, which was under siege not by an army, but by the Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. She devoured all who failed to answer her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Oedipus answered without hesitation, man. The Sphinx, defeated, threw herself from a cliff. Thebes rejoiced. Even as temples to Zeus reached towards the heavens and Athena's wisdom illuminated the minds of city-states, darker gods walked the earth. Gods of wine and madness, of death and rebirth, of things not carved onto public altars but whispered in secret groves and torchlit caves. Chief among them was Dionysus, the last to take his seat on Olympus and the only one who truly bridged the gap between the divine and the wild. Dionysus was no ordinary god, his very birth defying the laws of nature and propriety. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes. When Semele, tricked by Hera, demanded that Zeus reveal his true divine form, she was consumed by his thunderous radiance. Yet, from her ashes, Zeus plucked the unborn child and sewed him into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus was born again, twice born, as they would call him. And from that moment forward, his path diverged sharply from that of the other Olympians. He was raised not on Olympus, but in the far-flung corners of the world, among nymphs in Nyssa, in the caves of India, in the company of satyrs and maenads. He wandered, not ruling from a throne, but roaming with flute and vine, his ecstatic train of revelers trailing behind him in a perpetual dance. Where he walked, vineyards bloomed and reason faltered. He was not merely the god of wine, but of transformation, of the thin, sacred line between civilization and chaos, between ecstasy and insanity. He inspired joy, yes, but also frenzy, and in that frenzy men and women alike might forget who they were. His arrival in Greece was met with resistance. Cities mocked his rites, kings barred his worship, and one by one he punished them. In Thebes, his mother's homeland, the young god returned in disguise, his followers stirring unrest with drums and cries. Pentheus, the rigid king, attempted to suppress the madness. He arrested Dionysus, scoffed at the wild rites, and sought to spy on the women in the hills. The age of the Titans had ended, but in its place arose an era of stories, tales of gods who walked among men, of heroes born from their unions, and of a world forever changed by the hands of the divine. The world now had its rulers, but peace, as always, remained a fragile thing, and fate had yet to deliver its final verdict. Long before humankind raised cities of marble or carved their prayers into stone, humans were absent from the earth. The gods reigned supreme, their courts perched high upon Olympus, their domains vast and varied. The world beneath them was green and untamed, teeming with beasts and silent mountains. Yet there were no hands to cultivate the soil, no voices to sing to the stars, no fire to pierce the night. It was Prometheus, a titan of the old blood, who first conceived of humankind. He was no ally to Cronus, nor was he ever counted among those imprisoned in Tartarus. During the Titan War, Prometheus had sided with Zeus, not out of affection or loyalty, but out of foresight, for he possessed the gift of prophecy and knew the direction the storm would take. Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, was aptly named. He was brother to Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, and never were two brothers more different. Where Epimetheus acted impulsively and repented later, Prometheus saw further, contemplated longer, and questioned the justice of every decree, even those issued by the king of the gods himself. He straddled the line between Titan and Olympian, old world and new, a creature of reason in a cosmos governed by passion and power. It was he who first molded humankind. Some say he sculpted them from clay along the riverbanks, his fingers shaping mud into limbs, his breath instilling them with life. Others claim he fashioned them in the image of the gods, upright and thoughtful, endowed with the spark of invention. The city's deliverer was made king, and in gratitude, he was given the widowed queen as his bride, Jocasta, his mother. Years passed. Oedipus ruled well and had 4 children, Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, and Ismene. But plague fell upon Thebes, and the oracle proclaimed the land was cursed by unpunished blood. Slowly, terribly, the truth unraveled. The old man at the crossroads, the queen's grief, the scarred feet, the servant who survived, and the blind prophet Tiresias, who named the king as both father and brother, son and husband. Jocasta hanged herself. Oedipus took her brooches and blinded himself, piercing his own eyes. He begged to be exiled and wandered the land as a wretched figure, guided. Destiny, however, found a way, delivered only by Antigone's hand. Seeking solace in the hills near Colonus, Oedipus finally found sanctuary, and a quiet death as the earth claimed him, his final resting place a secret guarded by the gods themselves. But the curse that haunted him did not end with his life. It extended its reach to his children. Eteocles and Polynices, locked in a bitter struggle for the throne, plunged Thebes into further turmoil. When Polynices was exiled, he rallied an army from Argos, igniting a war, the Seven against Thebes, that stained the city crimson. In a final, tragic confrontation, the brothers met in single combat at the city gates, each delivering the killing blow to the other. Thebes survived, but its spirit was irrevocably broken. Antigone, the last vestige of the family's honor, defied royal decree to bury her brother. For this act of defiance, she was condemned by her uncle Creon and entombed alive. As punishment, the gods unleashed madness and death upon his house. Thebes endured, but its kingship became a revolving door of ruin and despair. But the god lured him into the woods dressed as a woman, and there, in a trance of divine madness, his own mother, Agave, led the Maenads in tearing him limb from limb. Only when she returned to the city with her son's head on a thyrsus did the spell break, and the lesson settled like a shadow over all of Thebes. Dionysus was the god of theater as well as intoxication, of masks and performance, of truths hidden within lies. His festivals became the heart of Greek drama, where comedies and tragedies alike were performed in his honor. Through masks and songs, the Greeks gave shape to fears and desires they dared not speak aloud. To worship Dionysus was not to bow before power, but to surrender to it completely. And with Dionysus came something new to the Greek world: mystery cults, religions of initiation, secrecy, and rebirth. Unlike the formal rites of Olympus, mystery cults promised something personal. In the Eleusinian mysteries, followers of Demeter and Persephone reenacted the story of descent and return, of a daughter lost to death and found again. The Orphics, followers of the poet-mystic Orpheus, spoke of Dionysus as a god torn apart and resurrected, a god whose suffering brought wisdom and whose rites promised freedom from the cycle of rebirth. These mysteries did not reject the Olympians, but they moved beneath them, quieter and deeper. They offered hope where the thundering gods gave only lore. They whispered of a soul that could endure, that could transcend the mortal body, and in that promise, the old certainties began to tremble. Even on Olympus, the cracks began to show. The gods feuded more bitterly. Ares and Athena vied for the hearts of warriors. Apollo fell in love too often and too fatally. Hyacinthus, Daphne, Caronis, leaving death and transformation in his wake. Aphrodite, jealous and capricious, punished mortals for the very desire she stirred. The gods began to resemble the mortals they ruled: proud, fickle, wounded, and lost. However it transpired, the first humans were created, and they were weak, soft-skinned, slow-footed, clawless, fangless, and lacking both fur and fire. They stood naked beneath the open sky, shivering in winter, defenseless against the world's beasts. Prometheus gazed upon them and felt pity. He ascended to Olympus and requested that humanity be granted a gift, something to aid their survival, something to elevate them above the level of mere animals. But Zeus refused. He saw in mortals not potential but peril. The god-king had only recently seized his throne and was wary of new forces rising beneath him. "Let them live," he declared, "but let them live in fear. Let them understand their place beneath the gods. Fire," he decreed, "is the privilege of immortals, the hearth flame of Hestia, the thunderbolt of Zeus, the forge of Hephaestus. These are not for mortal hands." But Prometheus, resolute and righteous, did not yield. In secrecy, he climbed to the heavens, stole a flame from Hephaestus's forge, and concealed it within a hollow fennel stalk. Carrying it down from Olympus, he gifted it to humanity. For the first time, fire crackled beneath the stars, smoke spiraled above the treetops, and light pushed back the darkness. With fire came warmth, safety, cooking, metalworking, language, and craftsmanship. Humanity, once cold and voiceless, began to build. And with fire came defiance, too. Zeus was not slow to discover the theft, and his fury was terrible. To punish humankind, he commissioned the gods to create a gift, though it was a curse in disguise. Hephaestus fashioned her from clay, a woman of unparalleled beauty. Aphrodite bestowed upon her charm, Hermes gifted her with cunning, and Athena clothed her in silver raiment. Her name was Pandora, meaning all-gifted, and she was given a sealed jar, mistranslated in later ages as a box, containing the sorrows of the world: disease, toil, grief, madness, envy, and death itself. The tale of Oedipus is not one of heroic deeds or cities founded. It is a chilling exploration of fate, a stark reminder of how one can strive to escape a prophecy, only to unwittingly fulfill it. His is a tragedy born not of inherent evil, but of ignorance, a man destroyed by the very truth he sought. The house of Thebes, for all its glory, was built upon a foundation of deception, of riddles and secrets, and no clever solution could ever alter the immutable will of the gods. Of all the wars to scar the earth, none would resonate quite like the one fought for the sake of a woman's beauty. A conflict fueled by oaths, pride, beauty, and betrayal, involving both gods and kings in the downfall of empires. Its origins lay not in acts of aggression, but in a wedding, a celebration to which all the gods were invited, save one. Eris, the goddess of discord, was pointedly excluded from the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, the sea nymph destined to bear a son greater than his father. In her rage, Eris tossed a golden apple into the midst of the feast, inscribed with 3 fateful words. To the fairest, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each laid claim to the apple, each convinced of her own superior beauty. To resolve this divine dispute, they turned to Paris, a mortal shepherd prince, son of King Priam of Troy. Paris had been exiled to the hills after a prophecy foretold he would bring about the destruction of his own city. The goddesses presented themselves before him on Mount Ida, each offering a tempting bribe. Hera promised him kingship over all men, Athena, wisdom and victory in war. But it was Aphrodite, with a smile as gentle as a summer breeze, who offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by the promise of love, chose Aphrodite, thus marking Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus and wife of Menelaus, as his prize. In Dionysus, the Olympian order met its mirror and its undoing. He was divine, yet he lived as a wanderer. He brought joy, yet he left madness. He tore down kings and raised up peasants, and most importantly, he changed the nature of divinity itself. The gods were no longer aloof and eternal. Through mystery, through ritual, through wine and song and madness, mortals could feel the breath of God within them, not in temples, but in themselves. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the wine-dark seas and the marble columns, new gods stirred. Rome was rising, the world was changing, and Olympus, for all its thrones and thunders, could already feel the wind shifting on the mountaintop. The Olympians, for all their immortality and glory, did not confine their stories to the high halls of Olympus. They descended again and again into the world of men, taking the form of lovers, tempters, warriors, or punishers. They mingled with mortals and left behind not just oracles or omens, but children. These children of gods and mortals, demigods, were born into a world that neither fully embraced them nor could ever fully contain them. Some became kings, others monsters, but a few became legends, their stories lasting longer than the walls of Troy or even the temples of the gods who sired them. Foremost among these was Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, a mortal queen of Thebes. His conception was marked by trickery. Zeus came to Alcmene in the guise of her husband, drawing out the night so that it lasted twice as long. From that deception, Heracles was born, already shadowed by Hera's wrath. For Hera, the queen of heaven, could never abide her husband's infidelities, and she made the life of Heracles a crucible of torment. While still in his cradle, she sent serpents to kill him, and the infant strangled them with his bare hands. Heracles grew into a man of impossible strength, but it was not brute force that defined his legend. It was penance. Epimetheus, ever the fool, welcomed her into his home despite Prometheus's warnings. And when Pandora, driven by curiosity, the final gift of the gods, opened the jar, the evils poured forth into the world like smoke from a fire long contained. Humankind, who had known peace in their brief, golden youth, now found themselves hunted by fate. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, war bled them dry, and age stooped their backs. Only hope remained inside the jar, some say by accident, others by design, a flickering light amidst the gloom. But Prometheus's punishment was yet to come. For the crime of defying Olympus, Zeus ordered him chained to a mountain at the edge of the world. Some say the Caucasus, others a place lost to myth. There he was bound in adamantine chains, unbreakable and eternal. Each day, an eagle born of Typhon or sent by Zeus would descend and feast upon his liver. Each night, it would regenerate, and each morning, the torment would begin anew. He was immortal, and so the suffering could not kill him. He endured it for generations, long after kingdoms rose and fell, long after humankind forgot the gods who created them. And yet, even in chains, Prometheus did not repent. He possessed a secret, a truth Zeus feared above all. That one day, the king of the gods would fall, not by blade or rebellion, but by his own seed. It was this knowledge that protected Prometheus, for Zeus could not destroy him without first uncovering the name of the woman who would bear his doom. So the Titan waited, bound but unbowed, as humans kindled fires in the darkness and told stories of the one who had dared to steal from the gods. The gods, for all their glory, were not alone in shaping the world. Beneath Olympus, on the soil that drank the rain and felt the sun's warmth, humankind struggled, rose, and fell again and again. Their lives, short and flickering beside the long memories of the immortals, nonetheless left their mark. Helen had drawn countless suitors in her youth, princes and kings from across Achaea, drawn not only by her beauty but by the allure of her Olympian lineage. Her mortal father, King Tyndareus, fearing the inevitable war her marriage would spark, sought the counsel of Odysseus. On his advice, Tyndareus bound all the suitors by a sacred oath. Whoever won Helen's hand, the others would swear to defend that union and to punish any who dared violate it. The pact was sealed amidst laughter and celebration, but oaths, once sworn, bind more than men. They bind destiny. Menelaus, brother to King Agamemnon of Mycenae, won Helen's hand. Their reign in Sparta was just, their kingdom prospered. But when Paris arrived in Sparta under the guise of peace and guest right, he saw Helen and recognized in her the prize Aphrodite had promised. Whether she went willingly with him or was taken against her will remains a subject of debate, lost to the shadows of song and legend. The poets disagree, but when Paris sailed back across the Aegean, Helen was with him, and in that moment the war began. Menelaus, consumed by rage, invoked the oath, and all who had sworn it answered his call. Odysseus of Ithaca, renowned for his cunning but reluctant to fight. Nestor, the aged sage of Pylos. Ajax the Greater, son of Telamon, a towering and formidable warrior. Ajax the Lesser, swift and fierce. Diomedes of Argos, brave and eager for battle. And Idomeneus of Crete, steadfast and unwavering. From every corner of Hellas, they came kings, princes, and warlords, all bound by their sacred oath. In a fit of divinely sent madness, Hera's vengeance again. He killed his wife and children. Racked by grief, he sought purification at the oracle of Delphi. There, he was told to serve Eurystheus, a petty king, and complete 12 labors, each more impossible than the last. He wrestled the Nemean lion, whose hide no blade could pierce. He slew the Lernaean hydra, cauterizing each writhing neck. He captured the Erymanthian boar. He cleansed the stables of Augeas in a single day. He drove away the Stymphalian birds. He tamed the Cretan bull. He stole the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. He seized the cattle of Geryon. He fetched the golden apples of the Hesperides. And he descended into Hades to bring back the hound Cerberus. Each trial was more than a feat of strength. They were encounters with death, with the edge of the world, with the very fabric of human suffering. Through them, Heracles became more than a hero. He became a symbol of mortal endurance, of pain redeemed through effort. At his death, poisoned by a robe soaked in the blood of a centaur, he built his own funeral pyre and climbed atop it, mortal no longer. The gods took him to Olympus, where even Hera at last accepted him as divine. He became the only mortal to join the pantheon, a god forged in agony. Yet Heracles was not the first demigod, nor the only one whose story shaped the fate of mortals. Long before him came Perseus, another son of Zeus, born of Danae, who was imprisoned in a bronze tower because of a prophecy that her child would kill her father. But fate, once set in motion, cannot be locked away. Zeus came to her not as a man, but as a shower of gold, and from that union, Perseus was born. Abandoned at sea in a chest, mother and child survived and were taken in by a kind fisherman. But again, a king's lust, this time Polydectes, who desired Danae, set Perseus on a path of peril. And though Zeus ruled the skies and Poseidon stirred the seas, it was the deeds of mortals that filled the earth with both beauty and sorrow. The poets who came later would look back upon this long, winding journey and see not one humankind, but many, each born into its own era, marked by the blessings and punishments of the gods. It was Hesiod, the Boeotian farmer and poet, who first set these ages into words, dividing the long march of human existence into 5 distinct epochs: gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Each was lesser than the one before, save one. In the beginning, there was the Golden Age, unlike any time that followed. It occurred during the reign of Cronus, before the gods had learned to fear rebellion and before the earth bore the weight of iron or war. In those days, humans lived like gods themselves, free from pain, untouched by age, and unburdened by toil. The earth yielded its bounty without coaxing, offering harvests in every season. There was no need for laws or swords, no need for kings or coins. These early mortals knew no hunger, no sickness, no grief. When their time came, they did not wither or suffer, but died as if falling into sleep, their spirits transforming into guardians, pure and watchful, wandering the world as benevolent demons, protectors of justice and peace. Theirs was a life of harmony, and theirs was the closest any mortal would ever come to Eden. But the Golden Age passed, as all golden things do. With the fall of Cronus and the rise of Zeus, the Silver Age dawned, a time of dimmer beauty and less noble souls. These mortals grew tall and strong, living long lives, but they lacked the wisdom and restraint of the golden race. They lingered in childhood for 100 years, ignorant and pampered, only to mature into violent, arrogant men who refused to honor the gods or heed their decrees. They built no temples, offered no sacrifices, and mocked the laws of Olympus. For this Zeus struck them down, ordered to bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. Perseus embarked on his quest armed by the gods. Hermes gave him a sword, Athena, a polished shield. He stole the eye of the Graeae, the old Grey sisters who shared one vision among them, and learned the Gorgon's location. With Athena's guidance, he approached Medusa as she slept, using the mirror of his shield to strike without looking, and severed her head. From her neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior of gold. Perseus escaped with their help, and on his return journey, rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, married her, and founded dynasties. His lineage would carry on to Heracles, linking their stories by blood and fate. There were others, Theseus, son of Poseidon, or Aegeus, depending on the telling, who slew the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Knossos, bringing Athens its first taste of empire. Bellerophon, rider of Pegasus, who killed the Chimera but flew too high and fell. Atalanta, raised by bears and swift as the wind, sometimes said to be the daughter of Artemis herself, who raced suitors and killed boars, but was undone by love and distraction. The demigods were never allowed peace. Their blood was too divine for comfort, too mortal for eternity. The gods watched them with pride and fear, for each one tested the boundary between Olympus and earth, and mortals worshipped them not just for their triumphs, but for their struggles. They suffered, bled, and sometimes died, but in doing so, they became immortal in a way the gods never could through story. As the memory of Troy faded, as cities rose and fell, the tales of these children endured. They filled amphory and temple friezes, echoed in poems and plays, and though the gods remained on Olympus, distant and growing more silent, it was in the lives of their mortal-born children that humanity found its mirrors. Flawed, courageous, doomed, and glorious. Their spirits did not become guardians or watchful demons, but faded into the underworld, pale and forgotten. Theirs was a race lost to pride and disobedience, a mirror of divine fears come true. Then came the Bronze Age, born of ash trees, the same trees used for spears and shields. These were not gentle men, but creatures of war, mighty and hardened, their very flesh said to be forged from bronze. Their homes were bronze, their tools were bronze, their hearts seemed cast from the same metal. They lived for battle and died by it, sowing the world with blood and ash. They were terrible to behold, but not inherently evil, only driven by the rhythm of war drums and the clash of arms. They built no cities, wrote no poems, and carved no statues. When they died, they left behind little but shattered swords and empty fields. Even the gods did not mourn their passing. They sank into Hades without echo or prayer. Yet not all decline is steady. From the blood and smoke of the Bronze Age rose a brief and brilliant light. The heroic age, a time unlike any other. It was not part of the descent, but an interlude of glory before the fall. These mortals were greater than those who came before or after. They were the demigods, the sons and daughters of gods and mortals. They built cities, sailed the seas, and carved their names into the memory of the world. This was the age of Perseus and Heracles, of Theseus and Atalanta, of Jason and the Argonauts, of Hector and Achilles and Odysseus. They fought great wars against monsters, against foreign kings, and finally against each other at Troy. Many died young, and many more died forgotten. But their stories lingered, carried in song and stone, in epics and prayers. Some were granted a place in the Isles of the Blessed, far beyond ocean's edge, where heroes dwell in peace and sunlight forever. The heroic age did not last, but while it burned, it lit the world. In the world of Greek myth, power did not rest solely in the hands of gods or heroes. There was something older still, something deeper, humming beneath every choice and every death, every victory and every sorrow. Fate. It was not a god, though the gods themselves feared it. It was not a law, though it governed even the divine. Fate was a truth, a force like gravity, unseen but inescapable, woven into the very bones of the world. The Greeks called it Moira, and sometimes she had faces. The Moirai, or Fates, three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. Clotho spun the thread. Lachesis measured its length. And Atropos, the one who could not be turned, cut it when the time came. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, was bound by their decisions. He might thunder and plead, but if Atropos raised her shears, no power in heaven or earth could stay her hand. And so, if fate ruled all, what hope had man? The answer lay in omens and oracles, the strange, subtle language of the gods and the signs sent to those who dared to read them. The Greeks did not believe they could change their fates, but they believed they might understand them. To see the future was to brace oneself against it, to try, perhaps vainly, to prepare the soul. The most famous oracle in all of Greece was at Delphi, where Apollo spoke through the Pythia, a woman seated upon a tripod over a steaming chasm in the temple's stone floor. She inhaled the vapors, slipped into a trance, and delivered the words of the god in riddles and fragments. Kings, generals, and common men came to her, some to seek glory, others merely survival, but her words were never straightforward. Apollo did not deal in certainties. A prophecy, like a blade, could cut both ways. So many stories twisted around her cryptic pronouncements. Croesus, king of Lydia, asked the oracle if he should wage war on the Persians. She told him that if he crossed the river, he would destroy a great empire. And then came the age that Hesiod called his own, the Iron Age where we still dwell. This is a time of sorrow and toil, a world grown old and heavy. Humans now labor from dawn to dusk, planting seeds in bitter soil, raising children amidst war and famine, growing old with pain and fear. In the Iron Age, bonds break easily between friends, between kin, between guest and host. Justice, once tall and golden, now walks with her eyes averted. Lies are plentiful, oaths are cheap, and the gods, if they still watch, do so in silence. In this age, mortals build towers but forget their ancestors. They chase gold and power and cut down the forests that nourish them. It is an age of struggle, and it is said that one day even this will pass. One day the gods will turn their backs entirely. One day Zeus will cast down his thunderbolt, and humankind will vanish like smoke on the wind. Yet for all that, the Iron Age endures. Humans still build, still hope, still tell stories of a time when mortals were golden and gods walked among them. And perhaps that hope, fragile though it is the one gift Zeus did not reclaim when Pandora opened the jar. In the waning light between the age of gods and the age of men, there emerged a generation of mortals unlike any before or since. Men born not from clay alone, but from divine blood and mortal wombs, shaped by both Olympus and earth. These were the heroes. Their lives were brief, their fates often cruel, but their names would echo through time like the rumble of a distant storm. Among the first and greatest of them was Perseus, slayer of monsters, founder of dynasties, and, by blood and deed, the forerunner of all who would wear a hero's crown. Perseus's tale begins not in battle, but in prophecy and fear. His mother, Danae, was a princess of Argos, daughter to King Acrisius. The king, like all kings of that age, feared what he could not control. An oracle warned him that his daughter would bear a son destined to kill him. He did not realize that the empire would be his own. Oedipus was told that he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to thwart the prophecy by abandoning him. He, in turn, fled his supposed home to avoid fulfilling it, only to walk straight into its jaws. The oracle, as always, had been correct. It was men's misinterpretation that doomed them. There were other oracles, too, at Dodona, where the rustling of sacred oaks revealed the will of Zeus. At Delos, where Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis. At Ammon in Libya, and countless smaller shrines where dreams, animal entrails, birds in flight, or the trembling of a flame gave voice to the unknowable. In war, omens were sought before every battle. A flash of lightning, a flight of crows, a sneeze at the wrong moment. These were not trifles. They were warnings, communications from the divine. A general who ignored them risked not only defeat, but cosmic punishment. Sacrifices were made before sea voyages, births, weddings. The entrails of goats and the livers of oxen were studied by seers who divined the will of the gods in the dark, wet patterns of muscle and blood. The art of reading omens became its own power. Seers like Calchas, who guided the Greeks at Troy, or Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, held influence equal to kings. Tiresias, in particular, touched by both male and female life, was said to have lived 7 generations, his wisdom unrivaled, his visions sometimes a curse to those who asked for them. But oracles and omens were not mere superstitions. They represented something deeper, the Greek understanding that mortals were not in control. No matter how mighty the hero, how noble the bloodline, how loyal the heart, the wheel of fate turned ever onward, and in that turning, all must one day be broken. The gift of prophecy was not power. It was awareness, and awareness, too late, was often indistinguishable from tragedy. Still, men sought prophecy. Such prophecies in myth, as in life, cannot be bribed or reasoned with. So, Acrisius did what kings so often do when faced with a truth they dread. He sought to eliminate the cause. He locked Danae in a tower of bronze beneath the earth, a room sealed against time and men alike. But the gods, as they often did, mocked mortal precautions. Zeus, in the form of golden rain, slipped through cracks no wall could contain and fell upon Danae in her solitude. From that union Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius discovered the child, he dared not spill royal blood directly, for even tyrants fear the wrath of the gods. Instead, he placed Danae and her infant son into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, trusting Poseidon or chance to drown them. But the sea is as fickle as fate. The chest did not sink but drifted across the wine-dark waves to the island of Seriphos, where a humble fisherman named Dictys hauled it ashore. He took them in, raised Perseus as his own, and in time the boy grew tall and strong, with the bearing of kings and the eyes of storms. But peace is never a long companion to those who carry destiny. The ruler of Seriphos, King Polydectes, took notice of Danae's beauty and desired her. Perseus, having grown into manhood, stood between his mother and the king, a wall of defiance. Polydectes, unable to strike the son without dishonoring himself, chose cunning over brute force. He announced a false betrothal, some say to Hippodamia, and demanded that all men of the island offer him a gift. Perseus, without gold or horses, boasted that he would instead bring the king a greater prize, the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, whose gaze could turn flesh to stone. The task was cruel, and Polydectes knew it. No man who had sought Medusa had ever returned. She was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, born of ancient sea deities, hideous and winged, their heads wreathed in snakes, their eyes cursed. They climbed mountain paths to Delphi, brought gold and goat's blood, and asked questions in trembling voices, for even if fate could not be changed, it could be faced. To know the storm was coming was not to stop it, but it was perhaps to die with eyes open. In this tension between knowledge and helplessness, between the known and the feared, the Greeks found meaning. Their stories were not about victory over destiny, but dignity within it. Even the gods watched the loom of the fates, unable to sever the threads they disliked. Hector knew he would die and still strapped on his armor. Achilles knew he would not return and still sailed to Troy. Oedipus sought to flee his doom and instead ran headlong into it. And the Pythia kept breathing year after year, whispering riddles in the smoke, her voice the cold breath of a world that had already decided what was to come. To the ancient Greeks, death was not the end of the story, but merely the end of breath. What followed was not heaven or hell in the Christian sense, but a realm both more neutral and more ancient. A land beneath the earth where all the dead, great and small, noble and villainous, made their final journey. This place was Hades, named for the god who ruled it, and though it bore no flames, no pitchforks, no horned demons, it inspired a dread so deep that mortals seldom spoke the god's name aloud. They called him instead Pluton, the wealthy one, for all riches, all veins of silver and gold, came from beneath the earth, and so too did the dead. The geography of the underworld was shaped not by logic, but by myth and memory. At its threshold ran the 5 rivers. Styx, the river of hatred and sacred oaths. Acheron, the river of sorrow. Phlegethon, of fire. Cocytus, of lamentation. And Lethe, of forgetfulness. Each marked a boundary not only physical but spiritual. Only Medusa was mortal. Her sisters were immortal, and none could be approached without peril. But the gods, who watched the world with curious eyes, favored Perseus. Athena, born from her father's head and never one to forgive a slight, Medusa, after all, had once been a maiden in her temple until Poseidon's violence and pride had defiled it, lent her shield to the young hero. It was polished like a mirror, allowing one to look upon a Gorgon without meeting her deadly gaze. Hermes, swift and shrewd, gave him a curved sword and winged sandals to fly and directed him to the Graeae, the Grey sisters who shared a single eye between them and knew the secret path to the Gorgon's lair. Perseus, through wit and will, stole their eye and bargained for the truth. They told him of the nymphs who possessed the sacred items he would need. The helm of Hades, which granted invisibility, the kibisis, a magical sack to contain the Gorgon's head, and knowledge of the place beyond ocean's edge, where night never lifted and the Gorgons slept among ancient stones. The dead arrived as shades, Psyche, breathless and bloodless, stripped of voice and form, and crossed into Hades with the help of Charon, the ferryman. For a coin, he would row them across Acheron. Those without proper burial, those who could not pay, were left to wander the shores for 100 years, whispering and weeping. Upon entry, the souls were met by Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who kept the dead in and the living out. Beyond him stretched the plains of Asphodel, gray and dim, where most souls drifted in forgetful silence, murmuring like dry leaves. But not all fates were equal. The underworld had its judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who weighed each soul. The truly wicked were cast into Tartarus, a chasm of torment deeper than even the Titan's prison, where oathbreakers, murderers, and traitors suffered torments crafted to mirror their crimes. Sisyphus rolled his stone. Tantalus thirsted forever beside unreachable water, and Ixion spun upon his fiery wheel. The rare few deemed worthy of reward passed to the Elysian fields, a paradise of soft winds, green meadows, and perpetual spring. There, heroes might linger in comfort, their memories intact, their deeds honored. Still fewer souls might choose to be reborn, passing through the river Lethe to forget their past lives, beginning the cycle anew. In later mystery religions, a soul might even hope to escape the wheel entirely and ascend to the stars, but such fates were rare and uncertain. At the heart of this realm stood Hades, stern and silent, a king without vanity. He did not seek worship, did not interfere in the affairs of mortals. He simply ruled, and he ruled absolutely. His realm did not change, and he preferred it that way. He was not evil, as later myths would paint him, but immovable, indifferent, the shadow cast by Zeus's storm and Poseidon's tide. And by his side stood Persephone, queen of the underworld, whose story, perhaps more than any other, reveals the strange duality of death in Greek thought. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. One spring day, as she gathered flowers, the earth split open and Hades rose in his chariot. He took her swiftly and without consent down into his realm. Demeter, in her grief, let the earth wither. Crops failed, rivers dried, famine swept across the land. No prayer could sway her. She would not let the world grow green again until her daughter was returned. At last, Zeus sent Hermes to retrieve Persephone, but because she had eaten pomegranate seeds, 6 of them or perhaps just 1, she was bound to Hades. The compromise became a myth for the seasons. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, and during those months Demeter would grieve and the world would grow cold. When Persephone returned, the earth would bloom. Life and death became a cycle, not a sentence. Over time, Persephone's role evolved. No longer merely a captive, she became a ruler in her own right, a queen who understood the sorrows of the living and the silence of the dead. She was both gentle and terrible, a reminder that even in the darkest depths, there could be a kind of beauty, a kind of power, and a kind of hope. Hades' queen, Persephone, held her own power. She was a figure of mystery, moving with quiet authority in the shadowy realm. The Eleusinian mysteries, sacred rites held outside Athens, annually reenacted her descent and return, promising not only the rebirth of the grain, but also hope for the soul's renewal. The underworld wasn't entirely impenetrable. Some mortals braved its depths and lived to recount their experiences. Orpheus, with his enchanting song, bypassed Cerberus and charmed Hades and Persephone, only to lose Eurydice with a fatal backward glance. Heracles famously dragged Cerberus to the world above. Guided by Circe, Odysseus made sacrifices to summon the spirits of Tiresias, Achilles, and Agamemnon, each revealing the grim truth that death offered no glory, only finality. Achilles, once the greatest of the Greeks, declared that being a slave in life was preferable to being a king among shades. Thus, the Greeks meticulously constructed their tombs, burying the deceased with coins for Charon, along with weapons, wine, and songs. They poured libations and offered sacrifices at the family hearth, for the dead were never truly gone. They haunted dreams, sent omens, and, through rituals and blood offerings, could sometimes be summoned for answers best left undisturbed. The underworld mirrored life, embodying memory and unwavering justice. It offered no heaven for the virtuous, nor hell for the wicked. It simply existed, vast and dark, governed by a god who desired not love or prayers, but silence. In this stillness, the Greeks glimpsed eternity, and in their tales of Hades and Persephone, of shadows and judgment, of the rivers and thrones beneath the earth, they integrated death into the cosmic order, not as a punishment, but as a transition. Even the gods aren't immortal, not in memory, power, or reverence. Every mythic cycle reaches a point where the divine presence diminishes, where once vivid figures fade from human dreams, and thrones once forged in thunder are smoothed by the passage of time. For the Olympian gods, this slow decline began not with war or prophecy, but with Rome, and a world that had grown weary under the burden of ancient stories. The Romans didn't destroy the Greek gods. They adopted them, assigning them new names and integrating their myths into Roman values and imperial ambitions. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune, and so forth, a transformation as calculated as it was reverent. Rome admired Olympus' grandeur but reshaped the gods to better reflect its own ideals: order, hierarchy, and empire. Jupiter thundered not from a wild peak but from the Capitoline hill, adorned in the robes of a lawgiver. The wildness of Dionysus was refined into the cultured Bacchus, and Athena's fierce independence softened into the civic wisdom of Minerva. In literature, the myths persisted. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, retold the ancient tales in elegant Latin, often with irony, always with poetic flair. Virgil, in the Aeneid, portrayed the gods as instruments of fate, manipulating events behind Rome's founding. But a significant shift had occurred since Homer's time. Homer's gods strode the battlefield, naked in their passions, visible in the dust and blood. In Roman myth, they became symbolic, distant, politicized. They intervened less freely, becoming themes rather than palpable presences. As the empire expanded, it encountered new gods and ideas. From the east came Mithras, a deity born from stone, slayer of cosmic bulls. From Egypt came Isis, a mother of magic and life, veiled in silks and secrets. From Judea emerged a single, invisible god, one who forbade images, scorned idols, and allowed no room for divine siblings or thunder-wielding kings. These new cults didn't merely compete with the Olympians. They undermined the entire structure of Greek belief. Where the old gods ruled by appetite and hierarchy, these new faiths offered moral clarity, unity, and salvation. Simultaneously, philosophy began to erode the mythic world from within. Thinkers like Xenophanes had long ridiculed the idea of gods shaped in human form, arguing that if oxen had gods, they, too, would appear bovine. Plato admired the beauty of myth but questioned its literal truth, suggesting that the gods must be perfect and good, not the jealous, lustful figures who squabbled on Olympus. Epicurus declared that the gods existed but had no interest in human affairs, and that fear of divine punishment was a superstition to be discarded. Even Stoicism, with its rigorous ethical code, located divinity not in figures but in reason itself, the logos that governed all. By the time the imperial cult emerged, with emperors declared divine and altars erected to mortal men, the boundary between myth and politics had completely dissolved. The old gods became symbols. Their temples maintained more for tradition than genuine belief. Farmers still left offerings to Demeter, and sailors still prayed to Poseidon, but fewer truly believed the gods walked among them. The flame on Olympus hadn't yet been extinguished, but it flickered dimly. Then came the final blow, not from a rival cult, but from a revolution of faith. Christianity, once a fringe sect of persecuted believers, spread across the empire, carried not by the sword, but by the word. This God was unseen, singular, and omnipotent. Its stories were not of love affairs and vengeance, but of sin and salvation. In time, its temples replaced the old ones. Its hymns drowned out the liars. Its priests denounced the Olympians as demons or fictions. By the reign of Theodosius I, pagan temples were legally closed, the Olympic Games were abolished, and sacrificial rites were outlawed. The gods offered no resistance. There was no final war between Zeus and Christ, no divine siege of Jerusalem or Rome. The Olympians simply faded, like the last light of a long day. Their statues stood weathered and silent. Their altars grew cold, marble columns cracked, and ivy climbed where priests once stood. The myths remained, but as literature, not faith. Children learned of Heracles in schools, not shrines. Artists painted Athena, but didn't pray to her. The gods who had once commanded storms and fates were now stories, beautiful, strange, haunting. And yet they endured. Even as their temples crumbled, they lived on in whispers, in poetry, in the architecture of the Western imagination. They reappeared in Renaissance paintings, in Enlightenment philosophy, in romantic epics and modern retellings. They became archetypes of war and wisdom, of love and betrayal, of hubris and glory. The Greeks had given them human faces, and in doing so had made them eternal in a different way. Though the temples fell and the oracles fell silent, the myths of Olympus did not die. They became echoes, faint at first, like a distant lyre strummed in the wind, then louder as time passed, and the world once again began to listen. For myths, unlike kingdoms, are not bound by stone and sword. They endure in the realm of imagination, and there the gods have always found a way to return. During the long centuries of Christian dominance in Europe, the gods weren't worshipped, but neither were they forgotten. Monks and scholars copied ancient texts, sometimes grudgingly preserving Homer and Hesiod, Euripides and Sophocles, even as they condemned the beliefs these works once sustained. The old stories survived not in temples but in libraries, tucked between sermons and treatises, waiting. Then came the Renaissance, that great turning of the wheel when Europe looked backward to move forward. In the courts of Florence, in the chapels of Rome, in the minds of thinkers like Petrarch and Erasmus, the gods rose again not as deities, but as symbols of human nature. Painters draped Aphrodite in seashells and light. Sculptors gave Apollo his bow and grace. Poets invoked the muse once more. Myth was reborn in marble and canvas, not altar and incense. The gods no longer ruled the sky, but they reigned in art. In the age of enlightenment, reason challenged superstition, and yet the myths endured. They were studied, translated, dissected. To Voltaire, they were allegories. To Goethe, they were mirrors of the soul. Romanticism followed, and with it, a return to the emotional, the tragic, the sublime. Writers looked to Oedipus and Antigone, to Orpheus and Eurydice, and found in them eternal questions. What is fate? What is love? What does it mean to be human? Then came the modern age. Myth was no longer confined to classical study. It appeared in literature, cinema, psychology, even comics. Carl Jung saw the gods as archetypes within the human mind, eternally re-emerging. James Joyce wove them into Dublin streets. Rick Riordan reimagined them for school children in Manhattan. In Marvel and DC Comics, the gods walked again, not in robes and sandals, but in armor and spandex. And always in the background, there remained the old tales, unchanged. Odysseus still sailed, Heracles still labored, Persephone still rose each spring. They weren't forgotten. They were simply translated, generation to generation, into new forms, new tongues, new dreams. Because myth is not fixed. It is living memory, shaped by those who carry it. What the Greeks gave us was not just a pantheon, but a framework, a way to explain the world, to wrestle with death, to honor beauty, to understand the self. Their gods were flawed, yes, but gloriously so. In them we saw not perfection, but potential, the agony of choice, the thrill of risk, the pain of hubris, the comfort of ritual. They told us what we might become and what we must fear. Even now, in a world of science and silence, the myths still murmur. You hear them in stories of chosen heroes, in fallen stars, in the slow turn of the seasons. A girl descends and spring waits. A king defies prophecy and loses everything. A mother grieves for the son. The faces change, but the truths do not. The gods may have left Olympus, but they never truly left us. They walk quietly now in books and songs, in dreams and memories, in every tale that dares to reach beyond the mortal veil. They are not dead. They have simply moved. And now the story ends. The winds on Mount Olympus are cold. The torches in Delphi are ash. But the myths remain. Good night.